Chapter 362. Apart from praising the stone man's self-discipline, Keyes was even more certain that he was related to the wrestler. After all, Cord's name was the god of power. When looking for a location for the temple, the priests under his command would definitely choose a place around a large arena. If the conditions did not allow, they would choose to open up a small gymnasium or gym inside the temple as an alternative. After the completion of the temple, they would spend a long time spontaneously building a large arena around it in order to make it perfect. As the saying went, if the superior is good, the inferior will be worse. Some of Cord's admirers also liked to set aside a place for strength training in their residences. In addition, the evil monk just said that the stone man claimed to be the champion of Cord's arena. How could there be so many coincidences in the world? When so many coincidences were linked together, it became inevitable. Although it was still uncertain whether the stone man was a follower of Cord, he was definitely related to the god of power. "Bald man, who did you bring here?" Just when Keyes was sure of his original guess and wanted to further clarify the truth, a muffled voice suddenly sounded, accompanied by the sound of stone chips grinding on the ground. In the depths of the stalagmite cave, a hidden stone door was pushed aside. Just by looking at the shape and thickness of the stone door, one could directly feel its weight. Even without an anti-theft spell, this stone door could make many thieves despair. The person who asked the question was the stone man from the Cronin Plain. If one did not have good eyesight, it would be difficult to distinguish this guy standing by the stone door. His broad body was like a stone wall. Stone. Cronin. Unlike his appearance, the evil monk was actually not so stubborn. This is the former commander of the mercenary camp from another plane. Now, he's the highest officer in this city. "Sir, he has something to say to you." "What does he have to say?" "I'm not interested in anything other than fighting, especially power." Although he looked like a stone man, this guy's head was not just hard stone. His brain was quite fast, and his speed of speech was not as slow as the earth elemental creatures. "Stone man." Keyes pushed the bald monk in front of him away and said loudly, "In the name of Commander Bartho, I accuse you of possessing dangerous weapons. Next, the Bone Demon Guards will come to collect your private stash. I think you understand what I mean." "Why?" In the empty cave, there was a rustling sound. The stone man clenched his fist. "You want to take away my private property based on your accusation? I remember that the law of Bartho law states that private property is inviolable. Unless the property is proven to be harmful to Bartho, and the degree of harm is determined by the officer of the place where the property is located." Keyes was familiar with the law of Bartho. He had read the notes of an ancient scholar. How could a mere stone man compare to him? "I guess you must have not read the notes of that law, and the additional regulations in the appendix. Enough, you greedy demon. Don't you think you can take away even a single green coin from the hands of the Cronin fighting champion?" The stone man took 2 quick steps forward with an agility that did not match his size. He came up to Keyes and said condescendingly, "What's more, what you want to take away is the personal gift from the Megalosaurus Legion, the Lords." And then, although from the size of both sides, Keyes seemed to be being bullied, he still said without batting an eyelid, "You will smelt the scraps from the Megalosaurus into materials and make them into swords. When the time is right, you will stab the head, heart, and groin of some unlucky pentashade dragon." "I know what you're thinking." Keyes pressed on and said word by word, "You want to dragon." This conversation was really shocking. Not only the young blue dragon and the stone man who were talking, but even the evil monk who was listening in was shocked. His round bald head was now covered in sweat. The stone man from the Cronin Plain lowered his head and stared at the short human in front of him. He knew that this was definitely not Keyes' original appearance, but it was just a guess. He was just a demon who liked to transform into human form. Generally speaking, when he was in the lower realm, the Batsu devil would not disguise himself as a human, unless the other party's ability was really not good enough, and they could only rely on deceit to obtain souls. Transforming into human form had become a habit. The wide chin moved slightly, and the stone man's body instantly lit up with light blue runes. With a muffled clang, a huge round stone fell at the entrance of the stalagmite cave and blocked the entrance. Stone Man. Seeing this, the evil monk knew what the other party was thinking. Although he knew that the young blue dragon was strong, he was still a little cowardly. Do you want to kill your superior? I advise you not to make a mistake. Intimidating punch. Without any explanation, a stone fist, which was half the size of the evil martial monk's body, suddenly swept over. The stone man was actually a monk too. This surprised the evil monk again. He had already refreshed his understanding of the world several times today. In the past, he had always thought that the stone man was an elemental creature who relied on the advantage of his bloodline. But now, it seemed that the stone man had definitely held back his strength. He was also a monk, so he was very clear about the strengths and weaknesses of this profession. Other than the mysterious rule of bald head plus critical strike, the strength, agility, and perception of a monk would be greatly enhanced with the advancement of their cultivation. The shortcoming of a monk was armor. After choosing a monk as a profession, one could only wear very little armor. Otherwise, the flexibility of the body would be greatly affected, and the power of some of the martial arts would be greatly reduced. But on second thought, the stone man from Cronin indeed had a lot of foresight to choose a monk as his profession. Although the increase in strength was not very great, the monk profession could greatly enhance his agility attribute. Moreover, not being able to wear too much armor was not a serious problem for the stone man. His stone muscles were his strongest armor. In a flash, the evil monk and the young blue dragon quickly retreated and dodged the attack of the intimidating punch. However, the stone man wasn't angry. Ever since he started using martial arts, he had entered a calm state called the 9 Trials of the Abyss. By carefully observing his opponent's every move, he analyzed the best way to defeat his opponent. If the first attack did not hit, there was still another attack. Stone Zen Style, Earth Spike Caltrop. Chapter 363. Mortals are so impatient. The magnificent game is about to begin, and they are already playing by themselves. In the cave at the bottom of the stalagmite, Stim sat on his rocking chair made of rattan. He crossed his legs and rocked back and forth as he cursed. He was holding a pen and paper in his hand, and he was writing and drawing, marking many things. Suddenly, a piece of gravel fell from the ceiling and coincidentally hit his bald head, which was not very round. How annoying! My inspiration for design was interrupted. I'd better find a quiet place to stay for a while. He stretched out his slender hand and snapped his fingers. All the equipment in the cavern, the catapult device, outside the cavern, and Stim all disappeared without leaving a trace. They left first. Is it a temporary retreat, or do they have other plans? On the way here, Keys had placed a magic spying eye on the spur of the moment. Originally, it was just for practice, hoping to improve his divination spells. For some reason, he didn't seem to have any talent in this school. However, coincidentally, after meeting Stim, this magic spying eye, which was placed at almost the maximum detection range, seemed to be of great use. It could be used to detect the mysterious dwarf master. Of course, in order not to anger the dwarf, Keys did not release the magic spying eye to stare at Stim all the time. Instead, it swept over from time to time, pretending to observe the surroundings of the dwarf's residence as if nothing had happened. Just now, the magic spying eye, with its special vision, discovered that there was an energy fluctuation around Stim's residence that was suspected to be a teleportation spell. Moreover, the catapult device, that Stim had placed outside the house all along had also disappeared. Although Keys couldn't see through this mysterious dwarf master for the time being, He had some guesses in his heart. To be honest, the young blue dragon didn't want to become enemies with him. At least on the front line of the blood war, he didn't want to make another dangerous enemy at all. Now, for some unknown reason, Stim had left the residence that he used to live in first. This unexpected turn of events made the young blue dragon feel like he was a monk, unable to make heads or tails of the situation. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Keys sighed. If you want to do something well, you have to start now. After calming himself down, Keys suddenly stretched out his legs and kicked several stone spikes that were attacking his crotch into pieces. At the same time, he clenched his hands into claws and waved them repeatedly. He used the martial arts technique of the tiger claw style from the nine-sword catalogue and brutally tore the stone words that surged down from the ceiling into two halves. He was different from Keys, who used brute force to deal with the situation. When the evil monk faced the sharp stone spikes that kept shooting out from above, under his feet and the walls around him, he could only rely on his nimble movements to dodge them. The space in the cave was limited, and the extremely unusual stone Zen style that Cronin used was very suitable for this environment. Soon, the space here was almost filled with sharp stone spikes. Seeing that he couldn't avoid them, the evil monk could only grit his teeth and use his trump card. He formed a sword with his right hand and pointed it at his shiny forehead. The secret tattoo that was hidden under his scalp and given to him by the elders of his sect was automatically activated by the evil monk, leading him into a mysterious state. Cloud force. In an instant, the flesh and blood on the evil monk's body disappeared, turning into surging clouds. Oh, a disciple of the Four Symbols sect. Looking at the evil monk that had turned into something like an air elemental creature, Keys was slightly surprised. As one of the main schools of martial monks, the reputation of the Four Symbols sect was not something that a small sect like the Stone Zen style could compare to. In the entire multiverse, this sect was famous. However, in order to better control the power of the elements, most of the disciples of the Four Symbols sect would not deviate too much from the good and evil camps. Most of them would choose to be like the elemental creatures, remaining in a permanent neutral camp. They would continuously train their willpower and physique to improve the essence of their lives. The evil monk that was forced to become a mercenary in Bateau's camp due to the contract with Bateau was obviously not one of them. Even without using a detection spell on him, Keys knew that he was definitely a red-named monk based on his actions. Stone Man, I'm going to smash that stone head of yours into pieces. The evil monk roared angrily. The skill Cloud Force was actually something that he could not grasp at the moment, but he had no choice but to activate the secret tattoo in order to save his life. As for that secret tattoo, it was originally a trump card that he used to further his understanding of the higher realms and to further improve himself. After losing it, his family would know that with his current camp attributes, he would definitely not be able to gain the approval of the elders of his sect. In other words, he might never be able to improve on the path of the Four Symbols sect's martial monk. Unless he was exceptionally talented and could figure out a new technique on his own, or obtain some great opportunity, he would not be able to break free from his shackles. However, he was just a minor character that the author did not even bother to name. He really did not deserve the treatment that only the main character could receive. It was because of this that he was so angry. He was so angry that he wanted to tear apart all the people who brought about his bleak future. Of course, with his normal intelligence, he did not choose to go against Keys. The evil monk had once seen the young blue dragon slaughtering in the evil demon army and fighting the incarnation of the evil demon lord. Although there was a high chance that he would not have a future, he still did not want to embrace death now. Thus, this martial monk, who used his anger as fuel and had a burning desire to fight in his heart, charged toward the stone man who had the same profession as him. Clear stream whip. Wind lightning strike. Lion's roar. At the cost of consuming the special energy called chi in his body, He consecutively used water whips that could cause blunt damage to the enemy, crackling lightning, and a sound wave attack that had the same effect as the intimidating punch but was more powerful. Baldy. A smile suddenly appeared on the stone man's chiseled face. Now you deserve to know my name, Stone Zen style, Granite Barrier. With a rumble, as the stone man hammered the ground with his fist, a wall made of granite rose up from the ground. However, in the face of the evil monk's hate-filled attack, even with the hardness of granite, a mere wall could not block all the attacks. When the clear stream whip brushed past, a large area of cracks appeared on the wall. When the wind lightning strike bombarded it, it instantly collapsed into rubble. However, the stone man who had been hiding behind the granite wall was now nowhere to be found. The lion's roar lost its target and only smashed into the wall of the cave, producing a buzzing echo. Stone Zen style. Rock escape. It turned out that the stone man had already used the escape technique commonly used by martial monks. Due to his style, the only medium he could rely on to escape was rock. And in this cave that was almost filled with stone spikes, rocks were everywhere. In a flash, the stone man appeared behind the evil monk and smashed his heavy fist into the back of his opponent's heart. Stone Zen style. Earth infiltration. Stone Zen style. Diamond drill. After transforming into a cloud, the evil monk was immune to most physical attacks. But under the effect of the earth infiltration, abundant earth elements forcibly seeped in, and sand instantly filled his body. And the stone man's heavy fist was accompanied by an even fiercer, diamond drill, profound meaning. Although it was just a punch, it was like a small drill, shattering every piece of earth and stone that made up his body. A large amount of damage was applied to the evil monk's elemental body through the earth and stone as a medium. Bang! With a muffled sound, the evil monk turned into dust and completely lost his life. My name is Stubborn Cliff Cronin. The stone man turned to look at Keys, who was watching the show. Remember this name, dying in my hands is also an honor. Chapter 364. In the face of an unknown enemy, Crag Cronin raised his own flag. It could be said that the ignorant were fearless. Indeed, after practicing the monk techniques of the Rock Zen school, the stone golem made up for his lack of speed and could better utilize his advantage in strength. However, the multiverse was vast, and there were countless creatures with extraordinary talents. Crag Cronin was strong, but he was not strong enough. He was far from being able to crush all those below the legendary level. Among Key's companions, the ogre Neru, who was also a melee fighter, was actually stronger than Crag Cronin. There was no other reason other than his strength. Although Neru had yet to reach the threshold of becoming an ogre's legendary creature, the ogre warlord, with his naturally superior physique, his strength was already comparable. In battle, Neru rarely fought alone. Coupled with his two equally talented twin brothers, if an ordinary ogre warlord were to fight against the three brothers, it was very likely that he would end up beaten to a pulp. On the other hand, Quess, who had undergone several evolutions, would find it difficult to complete a round in front of the young blue dragon even if he was the pinnacle of legendary champions. If he was a legendary being, how could a mere stone golem like Crag Cronin do it? However, because Crag Cronin had exposed his high-level monk profession, and also out of fear of the dwarf who suddenly left, Keys gave up on the idea of killing him in one go. He wanted to have a good fight with the stone golem. 9 swords against Rock Zen. Breaking apart a rock pillar in front of him, Quest chose a sharper cone and added a few spells to increase its strength. He then coldly said to the stone golem not far away, "Don't worry, I'll give it a try. If you want to fight, let's fight." Although Crag Cronin's expression did not change, his stone eyes shone with the light of lava. It was obvious that the desire to fight was ignited in his heart as he faced the enemy who had already made his move. Gladly, foolish Batsu Devil. Perhaps years later, you will regret your greed today. A battle was a battle. There was only the difference between victory and defeat. There were no fair or unfair restrictions. He thought that Keys was a demon, so killing him in the chaotic bottomless abyss might not be enough to kill him completely. He could only let him return to Bader and wait for 99 years to revive. However, as long as it didn't affect his current plan, it was enough. It was worth mentioning that as the champion of Cord Arena, the fact that Naughty Rock was able to be brought to the front line by Batsu's devil contract meant that he was not a pure person. The stone that formed his heart was most likely an obsidian that was as black as ink. Therefore, in the face of Key's challenge, not only did he not take the initiative to disperse the terrain that was unfair to the young blue dragon, but he also used the gap in their conversation to decisively launch a sneak attack. Gotcha! The rock pillar behind Keys suddenly disintegrated, and a fist penetrated through it. This was one of Wang Yan's abilities. As long as there was a rock within 100 steps of him, he could move his body to it at will. At this time, his arm had already reached into a rock spike beside him, and the place where his arm came out was behind the young blue dragon. However, Wang Yan's sneak attack did not work. He was still a little too slow, or rather, Keys's reaction was a little faster. The young blue dragon swung his arm back, and the rock spike in his hand pierced through the rock fist that was trying to dig out his heart. Due to the enchantment, the rock spike in Key's hand was very hard. Wang Yan's rock hand was unable to withstand a single blow from it. Humph! Wang Yan's expression turned serious. Your reaction is quite fast. He yanked his arm back, and as the rock fist shattered, Rock mischievous retracted his arm. The new rocks crisscrossed and repaired his broken arm. In just a few breaths, a new arm grew out. Due to the 9 trials of the abyss, status and his natural armor that weakened his senses, Wang Yan did not feel much pain. However, Keys's reaction speed shocked him. Although the monk class could somewhat make up for his shortcomings, Wang Yan still lacked an effective way to counter his opponent who was too agile. Currently, the only proven effective method was to restrict his opponent's space to maneuver. Before he attacked, he sealed the entrance of the cave tightly, and at the same time used rock spike caltrops to change the terrain of the cave. He was worried that Keys and the evil monk would be too agile, and he wanted to nip the problem in the bud. As it turned out, his choice was very wise. In just a short time, the evil monk was forced to use all his trump cards. In the end, he was only able to unleash about 70% of his full strength before he died tragically under Wang Yan's combo. However, based on Keys's performance and his identity as the commander of the Batsu, Wang Yan felt that his tricks were not enough to restrict his opponent's ability. Moreover, based on the way Keys dealt with the rock spikes, using brute force to create space for himself, Wang Yan felt that his opponent's strength and vitality were not inferior to his own. To sum it up in one sentence, this opponent was very difficult to deal with. As a martial arts champion, Wang Yan felt that he enjoyed the process of fighting with an opponent who was close to his level. However, this was not a competition of skills in the arena, but to eliminate the hidden dangers of his plan. If that was the case, then the sooner the better. Because any delay could lead to unexpected changes, and one careless move could lead to failure. He did not dare, and could not bear the consequences of his plan failing. After analyzing the pros and cons, Wang Yan's eyes became more determined. Greedy devil, you asked for it. With a series of crackling sounds, as if it was being carved by an invisible sharp blade, winding grooves appeared on Rock's stone body and quickly spread to the surface of his cheeks. Lava gushed out from Wang Yan's eyes as if he was crying. The lava flowed along the grooves and covered his entire body. At this moment, he seemed to have turned into a lava creature. His originally dark green stone skin was now glowing with a sickly red light. Stone Zen style, broken rock array. Wang Yan suddenly knelt down on one knee, pressed his arm down and punched the ground. At the same time, 6 floating rocks with mysterious runes on them suddenly popped out from the ground around Keys. These rocks emitted a strange wave, and vaguely surrounded the young blue dragon. Stone Zen Esoteric. Magnetization. Just as Keys was about to jump to escape the encirclement of the floating rocks, Wang Yen suddenly waved his hand and pointed forward. The formation of the floating rocks suddenly exploded with a strange energy and froze the young blue dragon in the middle. Other than his movement being interrupted, Keys also felt a special energy lingering around his body. Moreover, this energy seemed to be able to counter spells to a certain extent. If he forcefully cast a spell or used a spell item, there was a high chance that he would fail. However, this energy felt familiar to him, as if there was something similar in the inheritance of the power energy dragon. This is magnetism. Keys suddenly realized that he might have met a stray cat wearing Cronin's skin. This is really interesting. Chapter 365. What was a mongrel? Mongrels were also known as the spirit of the earth. They were famous for rolling around and kicking their opponents and teammates around. However, without the support of Fatso's round and cute appearance, the terrible experience of using him, whether as an opponent, a teammate, or for himself, would simply make people want to hammer him when they saw him. As the saying goes, a team battle can be lost, but a mongrel must die. Perhaps due to habit, Keys saw Rock Golem use a skill similar to a game hero in his memory. He sighed at the fickleness of fate and found it interesting. Then, he glared at Rock Golem. Of course, Rock Golem was holding back his strength to use the Rock Zen Sex combo attack. He did not notice the change in the young blue dragon's expression. In order to end the battle quickly, he had no choice but to use his trump card like the evil monk from before. Although Rock Golem's trump card was not a one-time use, it required him to suffer a great deal of pain. After all, he was a Cronin Rock Golem, a branch of the Rock Golem race. He was not a real fire creature. In order to manipulate the magnetic field in a small area, Rock Golem could only bathe himself in lava to heat up his body. Rock Zen Sect. Grasp of geomagnetism. Rock Golem, who was kneeling on the ground, reached out his hand and clenched it tightly. The floating rocks surrounding Keys immediately received the command. This was a common way to use the rock remnant array. It was best used against enemies with high agility. As long as one was surrounded by the array of suspended rocks, the dense magnetic field could not only prevent the opponent from casting spells, but it could also create a repulsive force or resistance from different directions to hinder the movement of the enemy who had already been magnetized. Although Rock Golem's skill was limited and could not manipulate the repulsive force and gravity within the rock remnant array, he could still control the rock remnant array and make it hang on Keys like sticky candy. Even an adult white dragon might not be able to carry 6 of them. Rock Obstinate stared at Kith, who seemed to be struggling. Let's see if you can still move at high speed. Rock Obstinate thought viciously as he looked at Kith, who was being dragged to the ground. To be honest, the weight of these broken rocks was really shocking. After transforming into his human form, Keys was actually unable to bear such a heavy burden. Moreover, the magnetized state was indeed not suitable for casting spells. However, one would never be able to defeat a strength energy dragon with brute strength alone. Keys, who possessed a portion of the strength energy dragon's bloodline, would naturally be much weaker. The heavy broken rocks were as light as a feather because they were supported by the force field he exuded. However, he did not take the initiative to counterattack. Since he had already used the grasp of geomagnetism, would the boulder tumble be far behind? Keys had a backup plan, preparing to give the stone man an unforgettable surprise. Foolish devil Batsu, turn into dust in your despair. Stubborn Rock roared excitedly, thinking that he had succeeded in one hit. Stone Zen style, boulder tumbling. The high temperature made the rocks on his body more resilient, which was why Rock was able to bend his body. In his excited roar, the stone man warrior monk turned into a stone ball covered in lava and rolled towards the young blue dragon who was bound. According to the records in the Book of Legacy, Creatures in a magnetized state would be in an extremely unstable state. If they were to be hit with another boulder tumble, it was very likely that they would be blasted into smithereens. Moreover, if this creature happened to be in the middle of the broken rocks formation, then very likely would become certain, and the broken rocks would also explode due to the boulder tumble. A long time ago, Rock had heard from his teacher that there was once a powerful half-dragon warrior who wanted to forcefully challenge the Stone Zen Styles mountain gate. He was attacked by the Stone Zen Styles headmaster in the Broken Rocks formation, and in the end, he was turned into dust. Although he had always been rather conceited about his own talent, it was not that he did not know his own limitations. Perhaps my martial skills are not as profound as seniors, but it is not difficult to crush this damned devil into dust. That scene is really something to look forward to. Little did he know that his actions also surprised Keys. It really is the boulder tumble. The young blue dragon shook his body, and the force field around him surged out crazily. The Broken Rocks formation was instantly pushed far away. The stone all in his hand was magnetized, and the magic effect on it was almost gone, but it did not matter now. Take off, Stone Man! With no personal malice, Keys swung his arm and threw the stone all forward. Coincidentally, it landed on the path of the boulder that Rock had turned into, and stabbed into the ground like a wedge. Chi! Whoosh! The rolling boulder crushed the stone, all that was on the verge of losing its magic effect. However, because of this obstruction, it could not move forward in a straight line, and instead, it bounced towards the ceiling of the cave. Tiger Claw style. Soaring Dragon Force. Taking advantage of the close contact between the boulder and the ceiling of the cave, Keys used the martial arts recorded in the Nine-Sword Catalog. He stepped on the ground and soared into the air, launching a surprise attack on the enemy. Tiger Claw style. Mongoose's Fury. The Soaring Dragon Force that he had just used allowed Keys's human form to fully stretch out. At this moment, he was like a spring that was filled with potential energy, and suddenly, his power exploded in the most violent form. Claw attack, kick, stab like a storm, he attacked continuously, turning into a series of afterimages. At this moment, Keys seemed to have grown 3 heads and 6 arms. Among the various styles of the Nine-Sword sect, the Tiger Claw style might not be ranked first in terms of the strength of barehanded attack. However, if one were to ask which style had the fiercest attacks, then other than the Tiger Claw style, no one in the Nine-Sword sect could give an answer. Warriors who practiced the Tiger Claw style would fully activate the beast side of their body during battle, and even magnify it several times in front of their enemies. They could obtain inner peace from the process of tearing their opponents apart. As the boulder turned back into Cronin's stone golem, and as the boulder fell from the ceiling back to the ground, Keys's continuous attacks followed it from the beginning to the end, and never stopped. Keys's fierce claws slashed at his opponent's body, as if they were carved by knives and axes. Although there was no additional damage, the young blue dragon who had transformed into a human form relied on his swift and violent attacks to smash the boulder until it remained in a stiff state, and there was no way for it to counterattack. In the end, Keys felt that his palm was a little swollen from the attacks, so he stopped the continuous attacks. As for the boulder, at this moment it had really turned into pieces. "You have failed, Stone Golem," Keys looked down from above and said coldly, or rather, the champion of the fighting under that fighter. Chapter 366. Rock, who could not remember the last time he was defeated, heard Keys mention the name of the god of power, Cord, and his rock-solid heart could not help but twitch for a moment. Rock's eyes that were like lava balls instantly dimmed, and he said weakly, "So, you already know." His tone was somewhat out of Keys's expectation. Through observing his previous behavior, Howren could tell that this rock man named Rock was definitely meticulous and at the same time, had a persevering personality. Generally speaking, mortals with such characteristics would not give up hope even if they were in a hopeless situation. They would give it their all even if they knew that they would die. But now, just because Howren mentioned the name of Cord, he had the thought of dying quickly. This was abnormal, very abnormal. Keyes suspected that his previous judgment might have been wrong. After all, Cord was only the god of power, not the god of victory. Although he encouraged his worshippers to strive for the crown of victory, he rarely punished the losers. To Cord, what was more praiseworthy, or rather, what was more in line with his priesthood, was the tireless efforts of the mortal worshippers in pursuit of victory. That was the actual behavior of the pursuit of power. Sometimes, the god of power would even favor the worshippers who had worked especially hard but could not make any progress due to their race's condition. He would personally bestow his divine power to free them from the shackles of their bodies so that they could pursue the crown of victory. So, on the other hand, for Cord's worshippers, failure was not scary, but the fear of failure itself. As someone who dared to lurk in the bottomless abyss and carried out the dragon-slaying plan step by step, Rock was not to be trifled with. Before the battle, Keyes even thought that Rock might be a god's chosen one who was undergoing his own training. But throughout the entire battle, Rock did not reveal any divine aura. Hiding his strength when his life was hanging by a thread? That was impossible, but Keyes could not figure out the reason. Unless, why do you want to slay the dragon? Is it not just to please the god of power, or is there another reason? Keyes was neither omniscient nor omnipotent. Naturally, he would ask questions whenever he did not understand something. This was a good habit that was worth learning. Upon hearing this question, Rock Mischievous was startled. He realized that the other party did not seem to know all of his intentions. It turns out that the Batsu devil isn't that resourceful after all. The Rock thought to himself and spat out a stone in his mouth. It used to be one of his teeth. Let's make a deal. If you help. No, as long as you don't affect my plan, I will tell you the reason why I slayed the dragon. Bang! The young blue dragon's fist, which was as big as a sandbag, landed on the Rock's nose and sent some rocks flying. Losers don't have the right to make deals. Moreover, do you really think I don't know? The mortals who were bound by the contract to the front lines of the bloody war were all paying interest to the devils. Before the debt is completely paid off, you have no right to sign any contracts that can be used as exchanges. It seems that my persuasive ability is still not enough. Then, have you ever heard of the term physical persuasion? Keyes glanced at the Cronin rock golem that was paralyzed on the ground and raised his fist again. Bang, 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 bang. Even with the racial bonus, the Cronin rock golem's body was made of rock, so they rarely fell into negative states such as dizziness and blindness. But under the young blue dragon's sincere physical persuasion, Rock Mischievous finally fainted. This strong rock golem's originally dark green rock skin had become bumpy due to being bathed in lava. Then, after being punched by Keyes, there were white stubble all over its body. After doing all this, Keyes personally opened the cave entrance that was blocked by Rock Mischievous. At this time, on the platform of the 15th layer of the giant stalagmite, the elite Bone Demon Guards had already gathered. After receiving Keyes's message, they quickly moved and searched every cave on the stalagmite. Anyone who dared to resist had already been killed with their hooked spears, and the corpses were handed over to the scavengers in the city for disposal. As for how the scavengers would deal with the corpses, Keyes did not care too much. This was because when they signed the contract with the devil, the tragic end of the mortals had already been decided. Moreover, even if they did not have to take on the task of the main battlefield, this city was still at the front line of the blood war. Participating in a long and drawn-out war, even legendary powerhouses could fall at any time, let alone mere mortals. Doing his own thing and taking care of his companions was the most important thing. In fact, it was not that easy to live peacefully until the end. The blood war was not a game. Not only were there not many bushes for people to hide in, but there would always be a few sneaky people who might suddenly jump out and attack from behind the scenes. That guy named Steve, on the way back to the commander's camp, Keyes wanted to sort out his thoughts, but when he thought of the name of the mysterious dwarf powerhouse, he suddenly had an epiphany and quickly erased the name that was about to appear in his mind. That guy, when he teleported away, he didn't seem to have cast a regular spell. Or rather, it wasn't a simple spell, it seemed to be mixed with some psionic energy. He claimed to be the master of rock mischievous, but what could he give to the stone man? Judging from his words and actions, he didn't look like a monk at all. It was unlikely that he was a grandmaster of the rock Zen school. Although you can't judge a book by its cover, not every short creature has the potential to grow into a Master Yoda. There must be something hidden in this. That rock mischievous must be hiding something. Coincidences were rare in this world, at least Keyes had always thought so. On the second day, when he arrived at the front line of the Blood War, in the area under his jurisdiction, he discovered a conspiracy that might be related to him. The group of Yugros that he had offended might be adding fuel to the fire for Rock Mischievous' dragon-slaying plan, and if the plan succeeded, the young blue dragon would definitely be involved, and might even be punished by the Bartholomew's camp. And just when he traced the source and wanted to cut off the detonation line of this time bomb, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of an atomic bomb that might have entered the countdown state next to the bomb. The illusory but substantial threat triggered the young blue dragon's senses, and he had to be alert and cautious. I have to figure out what this rock mischievous is hiding as soon as possible. If I can't find out by physical means, then I'll use another method, but it must be fast. Chapter 367. Everyone had their own specializations. Even the high and mighty gods had to make a choice when it came to pursuing power. In terms of the art of magic, there were roughly 8 different schools of thought. Perhaps it was because they were obsessed with a certain field, or perhaps they lacked talent in certain fields. Some spellcasters would choose among them. They would choose a school of thought that was more compatible with them and delve deeper into it, and give up all research in the opposite field of magic. These spellcasters were commonly known as specialized wizards, and the most representative of them were the red-robed wizards of the world of Toril. To be honest, for mortal spellcasters with limited lifespans, specialized was indeed a good strategy. Just like when playing a game, only completing the main mission would allow one to clear the game quickly. Choosing to give up some research in the field of magic would instead allow the mortal spellcasters to grow faster and obtain more power. However, nothing was absolute. Spellcasters who could dabble in 8 schools at the same time and achieve great achievements also existed in the multiverse. However, the prerequisite was that this spellcaster not only had to be extraordinarily talented, but also had to have a long enough lifespan. Keyes' magic consultant, the steampunk half-lich Snade, was such a jack-of-all-trades in the field of magic. When the young blue dragon dragged the stone man who was in a stunned state and found this magic consultant, the other party was carrying out related research with the ogre witch doctor, Paru, on the value of rearing meat acid mist worms, under the combined modification of voodoo and magic. The escape experiment that had lasted for more than 300 years had made Snade very clear about the physiological structure of the acid mist worms. The ogre Paru's voodoo skills were also very good. In just a day, he used voodoo potions to eliminate some acid mist worms into meat worms that were fat and easy to tame. In addition, this city was located near the camp of the Bator Expeditionary Army. The power of order was strong, and the worm rule, set by the tyrant worm, had no effect at all. Therefore, creatures did not have to worry about being accidentally parasitized by the acid mist worms. With all these advantages added together, Snade and Paru could be said to have made rapid progress in this research. The research on this technology was also a very important part of Keyes' previous plan. If Keyes could master the rearing technique of the meat acid mist worms, and cooperate with the cooking technique of Gree, who was recruited by Ogre Brew and had the stomach of a devil. Not only would he be able to better control the Abyss City, but he would also be able to expand the scale of the city by several times. It should be noted that while most of the plains in the Abyss were vast, most of them didn't possess the characteristic of infinite territory. Acid Fog Canyon, on the other hand, was one of the smaller ones. According to the Evil Dragon Council's investigation, as well as the research and analysis of some Batsu scholars, the commander of the Batsu faction had mentioned that the Acid Fog Canyon was only 3.75 times the size of Dis City. It was conceivable that if Keyes had a way to expand the city under his jurisdiction, the power of order would also spread and cover a larger area in the Acid Fog Canyon. This plan was like boiling a frog in warm water. It would slowly squeeze, invade, and corrode the war potential of the tyrant worm. In the end, Keyes would most likely be the mastermind behind the scenes and eliminate the dangerous enemy, the tyrant worm. Of course, there were priorities. Although the research on the meat acid mist worms was very important, the problem Keyes was facing now was more troublesome. Therefore, after the young blue dragon described the situation of the Cronin's stubborn rock in detail, Snade immediately stopped his research and began to use some enchantment spells that could distort one's mind to help Quess obtain the answer he wanted. In fact, on the way here, apart from physical persuasion, Keyes also tried to use psionic energy to probe Rock's mind. But no matter how he tried, he could only see a series of vague images. The depths of Rock's mind seemed to be empty. Thanks to the inheritance of the wise warrior of Gith, Keyes knew the reason for this situation. It was most likely that Rock's mind had been controlled by a powerful psionic user for a long period of time, so there were some repercussions. Generally speaking, this situation was more common in the astral plane, but now it was more common in the Underdark. The Grey Dwarves and subterranean gnomes, who did not have psionic abilities, were like the ancestors of the Gith people. Due to being enslaved by the psionic ability of a monster called the Mind Flayer for a long period of time, some special individuals would often be born in their tribe. These special individuals could be roughly divided into two types. Most of them were first-generation individuals who had awakened the psionic ability. With a little training, they could grow into psionic warlocks or psionic warriors. From a certain point of view, their talents were even higher than the average level of the Mind Flayer race. The other type of special individuals was even rarer than those who had awakened the psionic ability. Although they could not control psionic energy, they were immune to psionic energy that directly affected the mind. Even if these people had never been trained, as long as they were strong enough and had suitable weapons, the weaker Mind Flayers would not be able to last more than one round in their hands. The second type of individual, regardless of race, was known as the immune. They were regarded as a great threat by the Mind Flayer race. Because they were chased by the Mind Flayers since birth, if they could live to adulthood, they would basically take the same path, to become the Mind Flayer. They would use weapons to pry open the skulls of the monsters and let them look directly into their own sulci. There were many such Mind Flayer among the Gith people. Therefore, in the inheritance left by the Gith sage to Keyes, there were some records about their deeds, as well as some corresponding personal guesses. According to the Gith sage's guess, the reason why the immune appeared was because the mind was controlled by the Mind Flayers for a long time. There would be some problems with the consciousness of the creatures, and they would eventually become less sensitive to psionic energy, thus showing the extreme phenomenon of being immune to mind control. And this was undoubtedly similar to the feedback that Keyes had received when he used his psionic ability to explore the stubborn rock. Of course, these immune were only less sensitive to psionic energy, not resistant to all spells. In order to deal with the Mind Flayers, the Drows, who occupied a dominant position in the Underdark, had actually captured some immune and trained them. And in order to facilitate the training, the Drows had developed a lot of targeted spells. Coincidentally, before transforming into a Lich, Snader was a Drow. After a long time, he came back to the topic. Every profession had its own specialization. Chapter 368. The strong Cronin was lifted by the neck by the steampunk Demolic and placed on the operating table. It wasn't a pleasant experience. But Rock Obstinate couldn't resist at all. He couldn't resist his fate. Most of his rock-hard muscles, which looked like they had been carved out by knives and axes, were now cracked and broken. His joints, which were originally very smooth and round, were now stuck by many small pieces of rock, and the feeling of moving his body had become extremely sluggish. In order to enhance the effects of enchantment spells, it was best for the target to be in a state of shallow dizziness. Therefore, to better deal with those who were immune to psionic powers, the Drows brewed a unique wine with the extract of spider venom. But no matter what kind of wine was given to a Rock Obstinate, it couldn't make him tipsy at all. In the end, Keyes added a physical persuasion to force Rock Obstinate's brain to shut down and produce shallow dizziness. Actually, I want to try it too. Rubbing the back of his head, Neru turned to his brother, the ogre shaman Palu, and said, I think I can do the same as Keyes' physical persuasion. I'll find a chance to do it again in the future. The original manager of the medical camp during the war, the evil monk of the Four Symbols sect, died in the hands of Rock Obstinate. As a sacred samurai with certain healing abilities, Jason naturally took over Rock Obstinate's position. Now, he was devoting a lot of energy to managing the medical camp. As it was the first time Desert Elf Brock came to the underworld, in order to help him adapt to the environment and atmosphere, Keyes directly appointed him as the city's security officer and gave him a team of bone demon guards to patrol the city every day. As for the ogre Gourmet Blue, he was quite talented in the distribution of resources. After taking back the rights to the medical camp and the Devil's Stomach Tavern, he went to the city's warehouse early in the morning to do inventory work. Only the brawny ogre Neru was relatively free at the moment. Although he was willing to continue as the manager of the weapons workshop, the servant army here didn't have any direct combat missions. Materials related to weapons were very scarce, and even the cleverest housewife couldn't cook a meal without rice. Thus, he was pulled over by Palu to watch how Snade made the stone golem and act as a temporary guard. Maybe. Palu was naturally very supportive of his brother, who was more muscular than brainy if he wanted to learn something. After all, there was no harm in learning more skills. But you have to control your strength. Otherwise, even a rock will be smashed by your punch. While the two brothers were talking, Snader finished his preparation. The steampunk Demolic rubbed the edge of the temporary console and pressed the device above. Two sharp metal thorns popped out from the surface of the console and stabbed into Rock's stone skull. Although the two metal spikes were small, they were made of adamantine after all. It was not a problem for them to pierce through the natural armor of the Clunan people. Then, Snader tapped twice on the control panel and activated the spell that he had added to the control panel. A light blue spell barrier instantly rose and enveloped Rock and the control panel. Fortunately, I have a good memory. The exhaust pipe behind the steampunk Demolic spewed out 2 puffs of hot air and made a humming sound. If I had forgotten this step, I'm afraid it would have been troublesome after I injected him with the ooze of fear. The so-called brain-eating ooze was actually a mutation of the ooze. When the Drows found a baby ooze that had fewer splits, they would put it in the body fluid of a strange monster called the brain-eating ooze. Then, they would cast spells to cultivate it in a specific direction and finally give birth to the brain-eating ooze. This special ooze monster was the secret of the Drow's ability to enchant psionic immunity with ease. While they were talking, a glass flask appeared in Snader's hand. There seemed to be some egg-yellow viscous liquid in the flask. He first pulled out the stopper of the flask, then aligned the mouth of the flask with a groove on the control panel. He turned the flask twice clockwise and tightened it. Finally, a flame suddenly ignited on Snader's fingertips and roasted the round bottom of the glass flask. The brain-eating ooze, which had been quietly staying in the flask, felt some discomfort when it suddenly felt the high temperature from the bottom of the flask. Driven by its instinct to avoid harm, it began to wriggle slowly toward the mouth of the flask. Little by little, with a soft pop sound, the entire mass of brain-eating ooze was finally squeezed out of the flask. At this time, the surface of the control panel, which was originally normal, began to flicker with faint electric arcs. Since the brain-eating ooze was a species cultivated by the drows, its resistance to elements was pitifully low. If it were directly displayed in the data, its resistance to elements would probably be a negative number. Therefore, the brain-eating ooze could only carefully cling to the specially treated insulating adamantine probes and slowly slide toward the stunned stone golem's stubborn rock, beginning their passive business journey. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. My skills are above average. Seeing the brain-eating ooze pouring into the brain of the rock, the steampunk Demolic smiled at his employer. He said in a rather reserved manner, "Next, we can start to peek into the memory of this rock." Then, Snyder took out another strange magic item, a skull carved from some kind of crystal. His fingers touched the skull's eye sockets twice, and the egg-yellow crystal that made up the skull suddenly turned completely gray. Faintly discernible golden threads began to appear. After the brain-devouring ooze invaded the subject's brain, it would slowly replicate the subject's memory by attaching itself to the cerebral cortex. This information would then be projected into the crystal skull in real time, outlining the corresponding model. Generally speaking, due to the attachment of the brain-eating ooze, the brain of flesh and blood creatures would undergo different degrees of hydrolysis. When dealing with psionic immunity, the drows would try their best to shorten the memory reading time if they didn't want to harvest a subordinate with too much reduced intelligence after casting the spell. However, because Rock had a stone brain, and Keyes wanted to know more details, Snyder spent several times more effort in the memory reading step. The bright golden threads twisted and intertwined, slowly outlining many very complicated models in the lead gray background inside the crystal skull. Now, there was only one last step to reading the memory. These models are the contents stored in the memory of the rock's brain. In my family, there were some masters who were proficient in this field. They could directly read the memory of the subject from these three-dimensional models, but I didn't put too much effort into this skill. Maybe it's because as spellcasters, we can always provide some convenience for ourselves. As he spoke, Snyder took out two magic items that looked like magnifying glasses and handed one of them to Keyes. I invented the model analysis mirror. It's very convenient to use it to look at those models. Chapter 369. After receiving the Mirror of Model Analysis from Snyder, Keyes could not wait to observe Rock's memory model in the crystal skeleton through this magical item. Sensing the will of the user, the runes engraved around the Mirror of Model Analysis started to flicker. Following a slight trance, Keyes's perspective changed. He began to observe Rock's memory with Rock's eyes. The first thing that came into view was a vast land. Keyes guessed that this might be the Cronin Plain where Rock was born. In order to quickly analyze the memory model, the Mirror of Model Analysis would remove some unnecessary distractions. It could only display the image of the surgeon's memory to the user. However, this did not stop Keyes from imagining. Rock's birthplace was adjacent to the inner layer of the Earth elemental plane. Mountains would suddenly rise from the ground every day. The Cronin people were born in such an environment. As the mountains rose from the ground, special energy from the depths of the Earth was transmitted to the surface and radiated to some special rocks, giving these rocks elemental life. At first, Rock was one of the Cronin newborns. They were in the early stage of being elemental creatures. Every day, these little stone people would fight each other according to their instincts and steal the rocks from each other's bodies that were affected by the radiation from the ley lines. Of course, killing each other did not mean that they were an evil species. It was just an instinct of life. In fact, even if the Cronin newborns' bodies were completely smashed and stolen, they would not die. Their elemental souls were born with the tough characteristics of the earth elemental. Moreover, the Cronin newborns whose bodies were smashed were similar to the players who opened a new save file. In a short period of time, their elemental souls would automatically attach themselves to other rocks and complete their rebirth. However, the frequent rebirth would definitely slow down their growth. At the same time, it also taught them to be cautious in every battle. In Rock's memory, this period of time when he was a Cronin newborns was not small. In fact, every Cronin would go through such a long period of ignorance. They would slowly grow from little stone people until they met the opportunity to become a real Cronin. Rock was lucky. When he grew from a small stone golem to the largest stone golem on the mountain where he lived, the opportunity that belonged to him came. The Elder of Stone, who had left the Kurunin tribe, brought a few of his people to the mountain where the stubborn rock was. The so-called Stone Elder was actually the title of the oldest person in the Kurunin tribe. They would receive the respect of every Kurunin tribesman, and at the same time, they had to bear the responsibility of this honor. At the last moment of their lives, they would sacrifice themselves to enlighten the newborns of Cronin with wisdom. Perhaps some people would be puzzled. Could it be that the stone golems also had a limited lifespan? The answer was yes. Even gods didn't dare to talk about immortality, let alone a mere mortal. Although the lifespan of the Cronin was undoubtedly much longer than that of flesh and blood creatures, the elemental souls in their bodies would eventually grow tired and eventually fall into eternal slumber. Becoming a Stone Elder meant that the lifespan of the Cronin tribesmen had entered a countdown. Following the sense of responsibility brought by wisdom and the instincts of their own race, every Stone Elder would begin their final journey of sacrifice when they felt that it was appropriate. They would first go to a random place where the newborns lived and then climb the highest mountain there. When it reached the peak of the mountain and blessed the vast land, the Elder of Stone would leap down and fall to the ground. When they hit the ground, their bodies would completely shatter, and their souls would embrace death. However, in the final deafening crash, some of the fragments that contained their wisdom would splatter in all directions. If a strong Cronin newborns were hit by the fragments, they would be enlightened by wisdom and transform into a real Cronin. As the Stone Elder was close to where the Stone Elder landed, Rock had obtained many fragments of wisdom, and so it was easy for him to transform. His body became more well-proportioned, and his body became more agile. His rock-like skin replaced the thick layers of rock. These changes made Rock stand out among the newborns, and he was quickly discovered by the tribesmen of the Stone Elder. They eventually brought him to the tribe where the Stone Elder had been. Rock spent the next few hundred years in this tribe. He experienced duels between warriors, wars between tribes, and battles against invaders from other planes. If not for other opportunities, the Rock King would eventually be like the Elder of Stone, who had enlightened him with wisdom. As his soul gradually waned, he would find a mountain peak and jump down, returning to the embrace of the earth. But one day, this powerful Cronin stone golem met with a turning point in his life. He met a powerful god. Although the god looked like a weak life form of flesh and blood, he was much stronger than the largest Cronin. He was Cord. Perhaps it was on a whim, or perhaps he really liked the sturdy physique of the Cronin people. The wrestler gave him an entrance ticket and invited Stubborn Rock to the sacred arena that had given him his name. He wanted to participate in the battle for the championship. Naughty Rock, who had grown tired of his unchanging life, gladly accepted the kind invitation. He came to Cord's arena, and naturally became a believer of Cord. Of course, part of it was the subconscious guidance of the god, but more of it was because Rock agreed with the god's ideals. Barbarism had its physique, and civilization had its spirit. Rock found a new goal in life through repeated battles and trials. He wanted to become stronger, because only then would he have the chance to become the champion of the arena. Indeed, compared to other weaker races, the Cronin people had a higher starting point. However, the multiverse was vast, and there were many strong people in the arena of the god of strength. There were titans, draconians, clockwork creatures in the realm of machinery, even in the aspect of strength, which he was best at. There were many people in Cord's arena who were far stronger than him. It was not easy to become the champion of Cord's arena. Rock was originally overjoyed because he had a new goal, but after reaching a certain rank, he encountered opponents that he could not compete with, and this made him feel defeated. That was until he encountered the second turning point in his life. Chapter 370. Do you want to become stronger? Rock mischievous saw a sticky note on the back of the registration form for a competition. He instinctively looked at the content. To become stronger. Of course, everyone here has this desire. Although he was surprised that the other party was able to tamper with the form signed by a god's chosen, he did not pay much attention to it. After all, the wrestler was a god of the chaotic good alignment. In his arena, there would naturally be people who liked to play pranks. Rock mischievous had been pranked a few times before, but the results were not serious. Therefore, Rock mischievous tore up the sticky note and continued to fill in his own registration form. But to his surprise, the surface of the torn note suddenly glowed, and a short creature appeared out of thin air. Keys, who was browsing through Rock mischievous memory, could not help but feel nervous as he held the model analysis mirror tightly in his hand. The small creature was none other than the mysterious dwarf powerhouse that the young blue dragon was wary of, Stim. Rock mischievous was slightly stunned as it was his first time meeting Stim. Keys noticed that his perspective froze for a few seconds. Before Rock mischievous could ask, Stim reached out his slender hand and snapped his fingers. Then, Rock mischievous' perspective changed drastically. As a bystander, Keys guessed that Rock mischievous' mind was controlled by Stim's powerful psionic ability. Strange scenes flashed through Rock mischievous' perspective like a movie. Rock mischievous did not realize it himself. He was like a marionette, guided or controlled by Stim, and began an illusory journey in his own mind. As if his consciousness had transmigrated, Rock was first placed in a strange country and became a creature of flesh and blood. Then, he went through a series of strange and difficult experiences. For example, he killed an eyewitness to achieve the so-called perfect stealth. Another example was fighting with an enemy named Blademaster, who liked to take out a giant cannon at the last moment. In the end, Rock mischievous found the path that suited him the most. During that training, he joined a sect called the Stone Zen School. After going through harsh training, he became a powerful martial monk. After that, using his martial monk skills, he challenged 12 powerful heavenly gods and killed them all. At the end of this spiritual journey, as Stim released his control over his mind, Rock mischievous was shocked to find that the Stone Zen-style martial arts he had learned in that unimaginable experience had been preserved in perfect condition. Just as he was about to ask Stim a question, he realized that he did not have the intention to ask. Rock mischievous could only rely on his own thoughts and call Stim master. Rock mischievous' eyes, he began to fill in the tournament registration form. Quest fiddled with the model analysis mirror in his hand, and Rock's memory continued to jump back. Stone Zen esoteric, magnetization. Stone Zen style, grasp of geomagnetism. Stone Zen sect, boulder roll. He's really like Qing Yaojin. Quest could not help but think as he watched Naughty Rock's performance in Cold's arena and finally in the championship arena. He's always the same no matter where he goes. However, the 3 axes were indeed powerful, and not everyone had the ability of the young blue dragon. Rock mischievous' opponent was a clockwork Goliath from the machine realm. Despite its huge size, it did not have the means to deal with the Stone Zen sect's monk. Furthermore, because its body was made of metal, it suffered even more damage after being magnetized. With the last boulder roll combo from Rock Mischievous, the Clockwork Goliath was reduced to a pile of parts on the ground. As he wished, Rock Mischievous received the honor of being the champion of Chord's arena. The God of Power's avatar personally bestowed him with the crown. However, this perfect plot suddenly took a turn. According to the precedents of previous tournaments, Chord's avatar would use his precious divine power to review the efforts of those champions in the long river of time while wearing the crown for the champion. The God of Power would organize these memory fragments in the form of images, sounds, or words to each of his priests so that the deeds of the champions could be spread more widely. However, when he reviewed the timeline for Rock Mischievous, the God of Power did not find any realistic fragments related to Rock Mischievous becoming a Stone Zen sect monk. In other words, Rock Mischievous learned the Stone Zen sect technique out of thin air. However, that was a complete inheritance of a monk sect, not a bloodline power that could be mastered by sudden awakening. At this time, the smile on the avatar's face gradually faded. He began to suspect that Rock Mischievous used some underhanded means to win the championship. However, in order to not wrongly accuse Rock Mischievous, and at the same time, to solve the doubts in his heart, Chord's avatar communicated with his main body in the God's kingdom and used more divine power, using his own priesthood as a guarantee to seek help from other gods with the priesthood of time. In the end, after paying a price, he finally understood the whole story. The reason why Rock Mischievous was able to learn the Stone Zen sect monk technique was because he was controlled by the psionic power of a powerful being. Although the other party later removed the control, Rock Mischievous was deeply immersed in it, so the change from consciousness to the physical plane affected his body. In short, Rock Mischievous was able to become a Stone Zen sect monk in a sense. The result was the result of a trick. Not only that, but because of his good relationship with Chord, the god who controlled part of the power of fate and time also reminded him. The powerful being who controlled Rock Mischievous with his psionic power might also be a new god who was hostile to Chord. At the same time, he also advised Chord not to kill Rock Mischievous. It was best to keep this Cronin as a bait. Thus, the newly crowned champion of Chord Arena was chased out of his beloved arena by the angry god as soon as he put on his crown. He also announced to all his believers that Rock had a new title, the Traitor of the Deity. The sudden blow made Rock Mischievous' life stagnate until another note appeared in front of him out of thin air. Do you want to regain the god's recognition and win the arena champion title? Rock Mischievous, who was at his wits' end, chose to follow his heart again. Chapter 371. That mysterious midget expert is actually a god. Keyes had obtained the information he wanted from Cragg's memories. He could not help but be a little surprised. Then, what is the authority that he wields? Could it be that the mysterious dwarf is actually the god of VR? Although this was the young blue dragon's thought, he did not know that his words were actually not far from the truth. However, the current Acid Fog Canyon was the front line of the blood war. Even if one was as noble as a god, one could not act recklessly. Knowing that he might be involved in the conflict between gods, Keyes decided to speed up the progress of his plan as a dragon following his heart. At the very least, he did not want to be unprepared when faced with some thorny problems. After leaving the Cronin stone golem, which had been squeezed dry of its last bit of value, to Snade, Keyes left his commander's camp. Just as tall buildings were built on flat ground, the order of Bot-Or originated from contracts. In order to speed up the progress of his plan, the young blue dragon had to personally go through a few procedures. Although he was a blue dragon, which was a little shameful to say, because of the administrative relationship, the servant army under his control was actually under the management of the Bot-Or Expeditionary Army. Therefore, the first place Keyes went to was the Bot-Or Expeditionary Army's camp. Perhaps it was a habit, but on the Blood War battlefield, the commanders of Batsu would usually only use one tactic: to form a strong camp and fight the battle in a daze. Therefore, as long as it was not too far away, their camp was generally easy to find. There was no other reason other than the fact that it was eye-catching. As long as one saw a city wall that was as tall as a mountain range and stretched to the horizon, it would definitely be the outer wall of the Bot-or Expeditionary Army's camp. If resources and time allowed, they would try to build a few more inner walls, as long as it did not exceed 12. The number of walls of the Avernus Bronze Castle, it would not be considered excessive. Fortunately, the Bot-or Expeditionary Army had only been in the Acid Fog Canyon for a short period of time. The demons only had time to repair 2 walls. This meant that Keyes only had to pass through the city gates twice, be interrogated twice, and pay the city entrance tax twice. If they did not want to be marked as enemies by the Expeditionary Army, they would have to abide by these rules even if they were on the same faction. They were not allowed to fly, jump, or teleport over the city walls. They could only enter through the city gates obediently. In order to avoid encountering some cliché scenarios, the young blue dragon did not transform into a human form. Instead, he transformed into the appearance of a horned demon. This type of devil had bat-like wings and a majestic physique. They were also famous for the single horn on their head. They were the backbone of the Legion of Devils and the best candidates for commanding small tactical unit. Compared to other types of demons, horned demons seemed to be braver. They rarely took the initiative to retreat in battle. In fact, this was actually a misunderstanding. They fought bravely in order to obtain the opportunity to advance. As long as horned fiends were promoted, they would be able to advance smoothly and become powerful pit fiends. It had to be said that Keyes had made the right choice as he walked through the camp of Bader's Expeditionary Army in the form of a horned demon. Faced with a horned demon walking towards them, the barbed fiends, steel fiends, and other low-ranked demons would all stop in their tracks and bow to express their reverence for the strong. You. That's right, I'm talking about you. Keyes raised his chin and gestured to the captain of a barbed fiend patrol nearby. The barbed fiend immediately jogged over and answered politely, "My lord, what orders do you have for me?" Keyes did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "Where is the logistics department's office? Give me the specific location." The captain pondered for a moment and replied, "There are 2 offices. There are 2 places in the office. If you wish to complain about the distribution of resources, you can go to the 6th sector, number 113. There's a small office there that specializes in handling logistical complaints. If you want to inquire about the next batch of logistics supplies, you should go to the Bardo Logistics Department's office in the Acid Fog Canyon, also known as the Acid Fog Office. It's right next to the Sector 1 command post, but they don't accept complaints." Having obtained the information he wanted, Keyes waved his hand and shooed away the captain, who still seemed to be hesitating. How stingy, not even giving half a calamity coin as a tip. The 1st sector was the headquarters of the Expeditionary Army. It was located in the center of the circular camp. After some effort, Quest saw the Bardo Logistics Department's office near the towering defensive buildings. It had a sign that read Acid Station Office. At first, Keyes felt that the office was a little shabby, but after pushing the door open, he discovered that it was a completely different world. The entrance with the sign was actually just a lift. The real office was more than 10 yards below ground. This was a huge underground warehouse. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of fluorite carved with runes. Not only did it give the place sufficient defense, it also provided lighting without any blind spots. Keyes was able to enter this place smoothly because he had a letter of appointment stamped with the official seal of the logistics department. Otherwise, the lift would have automatically triggered a mechanism and randomly banished him to an unknown corner of the multiverse. Perhaps due to the precision of the operation, there was not a single inferior demon in this underground warehouse. Many specially modified magic golems were walking around the strategic teleportation gate in the center of the underground warehouse. They first sorted the resources, then packed them up and put them into small teleportation gates that connected the various commanders' camp. While Keyes was amazed by the logistics department of Bottor, the person in charge of logistics came up to him. To Keyes' surprise, this person was not a purebred Batsu devil, but a tiefling. The tiefling was wearing a black ceremonial robe made of top-quality silk. Several heavy gold rings studded with pearls and gems clattered on his fingers. Apart from the aura of a nouveau riche, this tiefling who was in charge of the Bottor expeditionary army also had a cold and aloof appearance. His lips were very thin, especially when he closed his mouth. Others would even wonder if he really had a mouth on his face. He was tall and thin, like a pencil, long, thin, and gray. Keyes felt that this tiefling was not easy to deal with, so he didn't bother with pleasantries. He directly stated his request. "I need to go through some procedures." Saying so, Shi Yen handed the tiefling a few application forms that he had filled out earlier. He even attached his letter of appointment. "You're the person in charge of that servant army?" The tiefling looked at the letter of appointment. After confirming that the official seal on it was valid, he flipped through the application forms. He looked up at Keyes in surprise. "You want to upgrade your base to Bottor Town?" "That's right," Keyes replied. "I think Boom Town is a good name." Chapter 372. Generally speaking, it was very difficult for a settlement to be promoted to a town within Bader's territory. Among them, not only did it involve an incomparably large number of audits, reviews, relationships, and innumerable procedural problems. More importantly, every town was equivalent to a territory. Devils who had their own territory would become Batsu lords. Becoming the Lord of Batsu was an honor that many devils yearned for even in their dreams. It was said that excluding the one in Nessus, the remaining 8 lords of the 9 prisons of Bader had all been ordinary Batsu lords in the beginning. It was easy to imagine how attractive it would be for a devil to obtain such a top-notch advancement. However, authority and duty were inseparable. If one wanted authority, one had to fulfill an equivalent duty. Every Batsu lord had to manage their territory diligently. If they didn't manage their territory well, the Batsu lord would lose the favor of the power of Batsu. In the worst case, they would directly suffer the humiliation of being demoted. In this world of Batsu where compassion was withering and treacherous, not only did the Batsu lord have to face the pressure of managing his territory, he also had to be wary of the schemes of other devils around him. However, it was easy to block a spear in the open, but hard to block a stab in the dark. There were many cases of people who had been careful for thousands of years only to lose everything because of one careless move. Some extremely powerful devils would not take the initiative to claim a territory and become an independent Batsu lord, even if they were very confident in their own strength. This was because the risk of doing so was too high. Most rational devils would not be able to make such a decision. Therefore, in the end, if one wanted to become a Batsu lord, they would have to at least pledge their loyalty to a certain devil duke to seek protection. However, what did this have to do with Keyes? He was not a Batsu devil. Whether or not he could obtain the favor of the power of Batsu was not important to him. What Keyes was really interested in was that after the settlement was promoted to a town, he would be able to obtain the right to manage it on his own. And this was closely related to the preparations that the Blue Dragon had made to deal with the possible troubles that might arise. "Are you sure you want to make Boom Town your territory?" To Keyes' surprise, after he submitted his application form, the tiefling leader, who didn't seem like an easy person to deal with, actually didn't make things difficult for him. In fact, the tiefling leader even repeatedly confirmed whether or not Keyes had made up his mind. "Of course, I will manage this territory with all my heart, carry out Bartho's will, and bring glory to the 9 hells. In Demon Count Kunini's personal study notes, there was a summary titled 13 Standard Speech Techniques for Facing Questions from Superiors. At this moment, in order to make his answer more standard, Keyes chose a certain paragraph and repeated it in its entirety. In that case. The tiefling manager tilted his head in contemplation. The young blue dragon sensed a faint magical fluctuation. It seemed that the tiefling manager was reporting the situation to a higher-ranked official in Bator. Yep, I'll provide you with the appropriate authorization procedures. So, what else do I need to do? For example, what form do I need to fill in? Keyes asked. That won't be necessary. However, you'll need to pay 3 soul prisms as a service fee. One of the unwritten rules of the 9 prisons of Bator was that it was easier to get paid. After receiving Keyes's payment, the tiefling manager waved his hand and summoned a magical item that resembled a typewriter. The tiefling manager reached out and tapped a few times on the keyboard, causing the machine to spit out a letter of authorization in the Inferno language. Keyes left his own secret imprint on this letter of authorization, and the tiefling manager stamped his own seal on it. After completing this final step, the ordinary-looking letter of authorization suddenly started glowing with a pitch-black light. The tiefling manager heaved a sigh of relief as he solemnly handed the letter of authorization to Keyes. From now on, you're the domain lord of Boomtown. Since Bator Town is located in the bottomless chaos abyss, the taxes you'll need to pay this year will be halved. Keyes patiently listened to the tiefling manager's instructions, especially the detailed explanation of the taxes he would need to pay. He gratefully thanked the tiefling manager before he finally walked out of Bator's logistics department's office in the Acid Fog Canyon dimension. That horned demon really doesn't know what's good for him. He actually dared to apply to become the domain lord of Batsu in the bottomless chaos abyss. Still, that idiot has given me a new source of income. Due to the difference in power level, the tiefling manager wasn't able to see through the young blue dragon's true form. Plus, he didn't have enough authority to read the letter of authorization that Keyes received yesterday when he returned to the front lines. That was why the tiefling manager believed that Keyes was a horned demon. Although the tiefling manager didn't think highly of Keyes's actions in establishing his own domain in Acid Fog Canyon, he still gave Keyes a set of basic logistics resources due to Bator's logistics department's regulations. However, the tiefling manager personally felt that it would be better to delay the distribution of these resources so that they wouldn't be wasted. That Boomtown. With such a domain lord, this town probably won't be able to survive for much longer. So, the young blue dragon had been able to complete the paperwork so quickly only because the tiefling manager wanted a commission. In that case, did Keyes really not know what was going on here? He truly didn't know what was going on here. However, the young blue dragon had already achieved his goal. He wasn't interested in those small profits. He still needed to gather more wealth. That was the most important thing of all. And for a 5-colored megalosaurus, especially a blue dragon, it was perfectly normal for him to urge his old acquaintances, who had conflicts with him and wanted to scam him to pay taxes. After all, the laws of the ancestors couldn't be ignored. After completing the paperwork, Keyes returned to Boomtown, which he had just obtained a new name for himself. He didn't even have time to take care of other matters as he directly went to his own camp and started reading the Lord of Boomtown's authorization letter to learn how to use his authority. The Lord of Bator Town has the right to collect taxes from merchants who evade taxes. The Lord of Bator Town has the right to set different taxes for different merchants depending on the situation. The Lord of Bator Town has the right to set prices for certain goods. Depending on the situation, the Lord of Bator Town can set prices for certain goods. The Lord of Bator Town has the final right to interpret all business matters within Bator Town. Keyes revealed a gratified smile as he read these friendly terms. It was great to have order. Chapter 373. In the acid fog canyon plain, in a certain corrosive cave, several acid fog worms were happily sucking in the highly concentrated acid fog that had been deposited. Poof! 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 A few wisps of steam suddenly rose from the mouth of the dried-up spring. Immediately after, a pillar of water suddenly rose from the mouth of the spring, and cold spring water suddenly gushed out. The acid fog worms that were originally eating began to flee towards the mouth of the cave, but they were too late. In the end, they still died beside the mouth of the spring, but they did not drown. Instead, they were all crushed by the bottom of the boat. Just now, as if it had appeared out of thin air, a large boat suddenly sailed out of the spring water and instantly filled half of the corrosive cave. This was a disaster crossing boat. Many merchants in the lower realms relied on this kind of boat to sail on the river Styx. It was the same for the Yugros Judgment Demon's caravan. They had just finished a trade on the 10,000 Abyss Plains. In order to prevent the Thanner Re-demons from finding trouble with the goods they had traded, the caravan hurriedly set sail and followed a tributary of the river Styx to the acid fog canyon plain. You lazy fellows, you've already arrived at your destination. Hurry up and set up camp. The sound of someone wiping glass with a wet rag tore apart the silence in the corrosive cave. This was the roar of a shrieking Anababa. Keep your voice down. The Anababa leader slapped the back of the shrieking Anababa's head. Because the noise had affected her meditation, the Anababa leader threatened fiercely. My lord is still checking the accounts. If you disturb him, be careful of your tongue being cut off. After being reprimanded, the shrieking Anababa, who had been shouting arrogantly just a moment ago, immediately changed her attitude. She carefully smiled obsequiously and said, "Thank you for your reminder. I didn't think it through. Stop your chatter and shut your mouth." Yes, although the shrieking Anababa wanted to strangle the other party to death, the Anababa leader was a knight Anababa that she could not afford to offend. She could only smile obsequiously. The weak obeyed the strong. This was the first sales lesson that the old Anababa had to learn as the salespeople of the Yugros caravan. Finally, under the command of the Anababa leader, the group of old Anababas began their work in an orderly manner. The dozen or so half-purgatory giants who were rowing the boat put down the oars in their hands under the urging of the old Anababas. Several of them worked together to lift a huge obsidian anchor from the bottom deck and then threw it down the side of the boat. The ship's anchor collided with the ground of the cavern with a muffled bang. Strange black lines extended from the ship's anchor to the ground. The ship's anchor worked. The ship broke free from the tributary of the Nether River and connected with the plain of the Acid Fog Canyon. After completing this important task, the half-purgatory giants became movers again. They walked to the warehouse at the bow of the ship, picked up the crates that the old ghost nannies had just marked out, and carried the goods needed by this plane. They put the crates on their shoulders and walked off the ship with the crates. Those old ghost nannies were also busy, but most of them were busy dressing themselves up. If they felt that they had applied enough powder, these ugly creatures would transform into new figures with a poochie sound. Because they had to cater to the aesthetic standards of this plane's customers, the old Anababas chose to transform themselves into humanoid creatures with beautiful faces. Those with average skills would directly transform into female humans. Those with better skills would transform into female elves that were even more different from their original forms. She even has to spray perfume on herself. The screaming Anababa, who had transformed into a young human girl, looked at the Anababa leader, who had yet to transform and was still working on the details. She was full of malice. This time, she must also want to make a cameo appearance as a street lady, to earn some extra money. She definitely won't hand over all her earnings to the boss. If I get the chance, I'll definitely. Just as the screaming Anababa was imagining the wonderful life she would have after reporting her leader and gaining the favor of the Yugros boss, the sound of hinges creaking pulled her back to reality. The door of the ship's stern opened, and the Yugro's judge walked out of the captain's room. Who was making a racket just now? Don't worry, I was just a little curious. The screaming Onababa instinctively shrunk her head and wanted to retreat into the group of old Onababas. However, the Onababa leader's powerful palm once again slapped the back of her head. She couldn't control her body and staggered 2 steps to the center of the deck. So it's you. Don't worry, I won't cut off your tongue. The judge with a wolf's head cracked a smile and said, because that will devalue your value. The screaming Onababa let out a sigh of relief. After all, without a piece of meat, those boatmen might not be able to eat their fill. Dispel the spell. The judge pointed his finger, and a red light flashed on the screaming Onababa's body. She returned to her original appearance. Before she could beg for mercy or explain, a palm 10 times stronger than the Onababa leader's grabbed her throat. The half-purgatory giant boatman with a slave collar around his neck bowed to the judge, then pulled the screaming Onababa to the boiler room at the bottom of the deck. These half-purgatory giants hadn't eaten meat for many days. Today, they finally got some compensation. After finishing this trivial matter, the judge's mood became a little better. He felt that today was a good day to do business. He took out a summoning manual from his body, opened one of the pages, and chanted an incantation. Suddenly, a huge purgatory salamander appeared beside the adversity-crossing boat. Pack the goods and set off immediately. The judge ordered the old Onababas. Because they saw how the judge dealt with the screaming Onababa, the old Onababas had extra motivation to work. It didn't take long for everything to be packed up. Thus, the Yugro's caravan once again set foot on the land of the Acid Fog Canyon. According to the judge's plan, the caravan would only stay in this plain for 1 or 2 natural days. Compared to some rich plains where the caravan could stay for 10 days to half a month, this period of time was obviously too short. However, this couldn't be helped. After all, this was the front line of the blood war. Staying here for even a second was a lot of risk. Moreover, the customers in this plain were also very bad. On Tana Ree's side, other than the worm tyrant that the judge wouldn't provoke as long as the judge's intelligence was normal, the other Tana Ree that was parasitized by the acid fog worm did not have much purchasing power. On the Batsu Devil's side, according to the news spread among the Yugros, because of the cooperation of the Megalosaurus army, the supplies in this blood war frontline were provided according to the highest standards. They definitely wouldn't be interested in the judge's grocery store. In the previous few times, the judge's only business customers were the servant army that provided services for the Megalosaurus. In the settlements of those bumpkins from other plains, the Yugro's caravan's goods had a certain market. Even if it's just a mosquito's leg, it's still a piece of meat. The judge sitting on the purgatory salamander's back comforted himself. Moreover, there's an initial investment here. If it's done well, maybe we can get revenge. Chapter 374. As a Yugoloth, the Judgment Demon had a long lifespan that was beyond the reach of mortals. With a long lifespan and the need to travel to various planes to do business, the Judgment Demon had many different names. For example, in the Acid Fog Canyon Plain, he would call himself Micah. This was actually the name of one of the Judgment Demon's old rivals. However, the other party had died in an accident, so it was not surprising that the name was borrowed. After walking on the ground of the Acid Fog Canyon for about half a day, the Yugoloth magic caravan finally arrived at their destination. According to the Judgment Demon's orders, the old ghost nannies raised the caravan's signboard high up, Micah's Bargain Shop. As the leader of the ghost nannies, Night Hag had already turned into an elf girl and walked slowly to the sentry post in front. She was a little surprised. In the previous few times she came, the sentry post outside the city was only guarded by a few barbed demons. Usually, she only needed to show off her body and hint something to the guards to save the disaster coins needed to enter the city. But today, the sentry post was guarded by a team of bone demons. She was not that arrogant, so she did not think that her charm could move these ruthless skeleton monsters. "Stop!" The Bone Demon Captain pointed his hooked spear at Night Hag and said coldly, "Who are you, and what do you want to do by stepping on the land of Boomtown?" As the Bone Demon Captain unconsciously released the spirit of fear, Night Hag felt her heart thumping. "Sir, I'm the representative of Micah's bargain shop." After thinking about it, Night Hag decided to pay the entrance fee obediently. After all, she had heard of the Bone Demon's ruthlessness. "We want to enter the city. What's the procedure?" "You are a Yugoloth caravan?" Hearing Night Ghost Nanny's answer, Bone Demon Captain turned his head and looked behind her. After a rough glance, he made his own judgment. Night Hag was delighted when she heard this. She guessed that the other party would be afraid of her high-level Yugoloth boss. Yes, we have come here to trade a few times. The customer's response to the caravan's goods is not bad. Pay the entrance tax obediently." The skeletal demon captain didn't want to hear her show off her eloquence. "Every person who enters the city will have to pay 1 calamity coin. As a camel, the purgatory salamander will have to pay an additional 3 calamity coins for the city's cleaning management fee." Night Hag did a quick calculation. The sales team had a total of 23 hag, 5 half-purgatory giants as bodyguards, a purgatory salamander, and the owner of the caravan, Mai Kuei. The entrance fee was 33 disaster coins. This was really a reasonable price. Although he didn't know why the Batsu had set up a toll here, compared to some of the lower planes, the toll here was much more reasonable. After all, they were only collecting calamity coins, not the precious soul prisms. Night Hag took out 33 disaster coins and handed it to the skeletal demon captain. She then received a permission to enter the city with a seal. To be on the safe side, she decided to ask one more question. "Sir, if we take the permission to enter the city from you, will we be able to enter the city to do business? Do we need to go through other procedures?" "Boomtown protects reasonable commercial activities," the skeletal demon captain replied impatiently. "Caravans only need to pay an entrance tax to enter the city." After getting the answer she wanted, the clever Night Hag sang a song of praise while urging the caravan behind her to hurry up and move forward. When the caravan was far away, the skeletal demon captain snorted coldly and took out a communication rune. After listening to the report of the hag leader, the judge of judgment was surprised, but he didn't think too much about it. As a merchant of Yugoloth who often operated in the Devil's territory, he naturally had a general understanding of the other party's temperament. Imposing exorbitant taxes in the areas under their control was simply a normal thing for the Batsu Devil. The only thing worth considering at the moment was actually how to spread the cost of these taxes into the price of the good. The Judge of Judgment didn't care about the purchasing power of the other plain bumpkins of the Servant Corps at all. In the previous few times he came, he had brought a lot of goods to Boomtown. In addition to the metal weapons produced by the Shuraba, there were also some products such as spices. The Judge of Judgment sold them at cost price against his will. He didn't pay a premium like the normal Yugoloth merchant. Moreover, because the currency that the bumpkins could bring out was really diverse. Gold and silver alloy things, poisonous claws that stung the hand, green horn that would constantly depreciate. There were even some bumpkins from the wilderness plain who brought out pine cones to make up for the numbers. In the end, the Judge of Judgment had no choice but to downgrade and return to doing business through bartering. It should be known that if this news spread to the other Yugoloths, the Judge of Judgment would definitely laugh their heads off. However, he didn't care much about it. In the Acid Fog Canyon Plain, his name was Micah. Of course, because the Servant Corps was in charge of serving the Megalosaurus, many of them had some leftover materials from the Megalosaurus in their hands. Whether it was to add some Megalosaurus characteristics to the fake magic items or to directly sell them to some people with ulterior motives, the Judge of Judgment didn't lose anything. However, the Yugoloth demon race believed in the saying, earning less is losing. If it wasn't for the fact that he had other thoughts and wanted to set up an enemy, he wouldn't have compromised with these bumpkins. However, calculating the time, the plot that he had set up before was about to come to fruition. In addition, the fee that he had just been charged gave him some warning. Worried that his tricks would be discovered by the Batsu devil, the judge of judgment was prepared to harvest a lot of goods from this transaction and then give up the alias Micah. How was he going to harvest, or how was he going to buy a lot of goods? In fact, when he first came to the settlement of the servant corps, he had asked the old hags to do something to the goods they sold. As long as they encountered customers who didn't seem to be spellcasters, they would add some seasoning, soul decay curse, to the equipment they bought. As they used the equipment, the soul decay curse would gradually make them approach the essence of the lower world creatures. When the judge of judgment wanted to harvest them, they would turn into soul prisms with a ding sound. Moreover, some of the equipment on them could be taken off and sold again in another place. Big discount, Micah's old trick. As if he thought of something, a smile appeared on the judge of judgment's face. It's very easy to gather the customers together without any effort. Thinking that he would soon be able to harvest a batch of beautiful soul prisms, this Yugoloth merchant was immediately motivated. Chapter 375. Judgment Demon stayed in his small tent. The appearance of this tent didn't match his identity as a big merchant. However, the interior of the tent was a different world. Due to the permanent Grand House spell, the interior space and decorations of the tent could even make the palaces of many mortal kingdoms pale in comparison. Needless to say, it also had some magical barriers that could be activated to protect the residents at any time. This tent originally belonged to one of Judgment Demon's clients, who was a powerful spellcaster. However, in the end, this tent and that person's soul were all in Judgment Demon's pocket. But so what? After all, a trade was a trade, and Yugoloth merchants never cared about favors with their customers. At most, they would thank these selfless customers in their hearts. And now, Judgment Demon was busy harvesting more. Unlike other Yugoloth merchants, Judgment Demon didn't like to use spells when soliciting customers, even though his spellcasting skills were quite high. In his opinion, using spells would be more convenient, but it would increase the cost, and the method would be a bit crude. He preferred to use more traditional methods, such as finding people to promote him and using word-of-mouth marketing. In Boomtown, there was a professional team of earth thrusters who were currently serving the Judgment Demon. Squeak squeak, that McQuay's bargain shop is here again. Those salespeople are so good-looking. Squeak squeak, a fine steel longsword only costs 2 dragon scale fragments, and there's a discount if you buy it in bulk. I have to find someone to buy a few more. Squeak squeak, an old customer bringing a new customer. Both of them can enjoy the discount. In the stalagmite forest, many shifty-looking people were running around on the narrow wooden plank road that was soaked in black oil. These people belonged to a large local bandit group. There were only 2 or 3 similar groups in Boomtown. Their name was the Mad Rat Bandit Group. To be able to survive on the front line of the bloody battle, even if they were just bystanders, this bandit group did have some skills. Compared to other groups, the Mad Rat Bandit Group wasn't the fiercest or the strongest, but they were very united. Of course, this was not because the members of the bandit group were very loyal. In fact, they had no choice. All of the members of the Mad Rat Bandits were rat shifters, or rather, ordinary mortals who were afflicted with rat shifters. The one who infected them with the beast transformation syndrome was none other than the leader of the bandit group, the great bandit Mad Rat. Either actively or passively, these people had all been bitten by the Mad Rat. At the same time that they gained the power of a werbeast, they lost their independent will and could only obediently obey the commands of the Mad Rats. As for the Mad Rat himself, He had long been firmly controlled in the palm of the Judgment Demon's hand using calamity coins and spells. Therefore, the members of this bandit group were now desperately promoting Micah's discount shop. Even if it was a rat crossing the street, it would definitely attract some people's attention when everyone was shouting at it. Thanks to the cries of the mad rat bandits, many people in Prosperity Town learned of the arrival of McQuay's caravan and hurried to the market. That mad rat fellow is quite capable. I can consider not turning him into a soul prism for the time being. Through the crystal ball on the table, the Judgment Demon looked at the crowd gathering outside the tent and thought to himself, although the mad rat's combat power was average, he was quite good at pulling people together. The Judgment Demon was wondering if he should take him into his caravan. It just so happened that he was lacking a talent in promoting. Let's finish this wave of leaks first. If the profits are good, I'll pull him in. The Judgment Demon made up his mind. As more and more mortals gathered around Micah's discount shop, a large open-air stall, the noise suddenly became louder. The Judgment Demon, who always liked silence, felt a little impatient, so he activated the soundproof barrier in the tent. The world instantly became much quieter. As for whether there would be chaos outside, the Judgment Demon wasn't worried at all. Other than those old ghost nannies who were salespeople, the caravan also had 5.5 purgatory giants as bodyguard. Not to mention that Prosperity Town was just a settlement of bumpkins. Even in some small baiter camps, the power of 5.5 purgatory giants was enough to intimidate a group of thieves and ensure that no one dared to cause trouble. Unless it was a powerful faction with a strong background. I remember the smell on your body. An enormous ogre squeezed through the crowd and twitched his nose. He pointed at the elven girl who was the leader of the ghost nannies and loudly reprimanded, "You scammers who sell fake goods, I want a refund." Originally, even when she heard the accusation of scammers who sell fake goods, the ghost nanny still maintained a formal smile on her face. But when she heard the word refund, the smile on her face instantly disappeared and was replaced by a frosty expression. She snorted coldly and sneered, "You stupid ogre, where do you think this is? There's no such thing as you." With a whoosh, the ogre swung the greatsword in his hand and viciously slashed at the ghost nanny's neck. Red and white matter splashed everywhere. The ghost nanny didn't even have a chance to resist before her head was crushed by the greatsword. You still say it's not a fake. After the sharpening spell disappears, this sword is simply a blunt sword. Otherwise, your head wouldn't have exploded. The ogre roared loudly. However, this brutal physical persuasion made many people around him deeply agree. Mad Rat, who originally wanted to step forward and get rid of this evil guest, so that he could show his face in front of his employer, could not help but hurriedly take a few steps back when he saw this scene. In the lower realm, strength represented the truth. Of course, not everyone was as obedient as Mad Rat. At least, the 5.5 purgatory giants who were bodyguards of the caravan could not turn a blind eye to this. The death of the leader of the sales team was due to their negligence. If they could not capture the murderer, they would suffer the wrath of the Yugoloth Records judge. The half-purgatory giants, who were originally standing around the market like pillars, immediately ran toward the ogre, who killed the ghost nanny with their maces in their hands. As they ran, they cursed the ogre loudly in the purgatory language, mixed with the giant's dialect. On the other hand, the ogre seemed to be a little relaxed at this moment. He casually threw the blunt sword in his hand to the ground and stroked the runes on his belt. A chain of ebony thorns shining with a metallic luster appeared in his hand out of thin air. Then, this ridiculously strong ogre suddenly roared and actually began to launch a fierce counterattack against the few half-purgatory giants who were surrounding him. Chapter 376. This guy is so strong that he doesn't look like an ogre. Facing Nalu's head-on attack, the half-purgatory giant raised the iron staff in his hand and was shocked. Before he could call his companions to surround and kill the ogre, the half-purgatory giant felt a burning pain on his back. Although he had blocked the giant ebony staff, he had neglected the living thorny chains. Several thorny chains whipped his back fiercely. Red blood gushed out and instantly dyed his back red. If it weren't for his thick skin, the half-purgatory giant would have lost most of his combat power. On the other hand, the ogre seemed to be a little dispirited at this time. He even held the ebony thorns in one hand and pressed his opponent to the point that he couldn't move and almost knelt down. "You're big," Nalu curled his lips. "But why is your strength so weak? Didn't you eat enough?" After saying this, the ogre didn't say much. He directly raised his remaining arm and punched his opponent's face. With a muffled bang, the half-purgatory giant's nose collapsed in an instant. Blood and broken teeth splattered everywhere. Without any mishap, the hybrid giant fell to the ground and fainted immediately. Seeing this scene, the other half-purgatory giants who wanted to surround and kill immediately stopped. After looking at each other, they immediately gathered together and formed a circular formation. While trying to keep a safe distance from the ogre, they launched probing attacks at the opponent like a viper, intending to use this method to distract the enemy's attention. Compared with other giants, the half-purgatory giants were not the smartest, but they were cunning enough to at least know how to judge the situation. The ogre in front of them was obviously not easy to deal with. They didn't want to follow in the footsteps of their companions. As long as they delayed the ogre for a while and waited for the boss of the caravan to receive the news, the judgment demons would naturally have spells to defeat the ogre. At that time, wouldn't they be able to do whatever they wanted with this damned ogre? Sure enough, it didn't take long for defensive spells to appear on the open-air stall of Micah's bargain shop. After ensuring that the goods would not be damaged, the Yugro's merchant, Micah, walked out of his tent slowly. "Who is so bold as to cause trouble at my stall?" The judgment fiend with the head of a jackal said viciously. His eyes were glowing green, and his scarlet tongue was sticking out of his mouth. Everyone in the caravan knew that this was a sign that their boss was angry. Law. Just as the judgment fiend was about to give the ogre a command intimidation, a series of clattering noises suddenly rang out. A stall was kicked over by someone. The judgment demon turned to look at the new troublemaker, and realized that the other party was an elf subspecies. "You want to return the goods too?" Yugros asked coldly. "Or, I'm just here to inform you." The visitor was none other than the desert elf Brock. He calmly took out a piece of parchment from his bosom and read aloud, "I hereby inform the owner of Micah's bargain shop, a certain Yugros judgment fiend. Due to destroying the environment of Boomtown, disrupting business order, creating ear-piercing noises, failing to pay business taxes, and intending to endanger the safety of Bato's camp in the Acid Fog Canyon, you and your caravan will be temporarily detained. On top of confiscating all illegal income, you will also have to pay the overdue business taxes and a fine that will satisfy the mayor." Following Brock's words, more and more bone demon guards appeared in the open-air market. They violently pushed aside the country bumpkins in front of them and walked closer to the stall, slowly surrounding the judgment fiend and his caravan. Law. Intimidation. The spell that was supposed to be used on the ogre was changed to a different target by the judgment fiend, and was directed at the desert elves. If he still did not understand that he was being schemed against, then he would really be letting down his high intelligence. Although the judgment fiend's spellcasting ability was not weak, he was not the kind of Yugros that was especially good at fighting. Therefore, when he encountered danger, he instinctively followed his heart and wanted to escape as soon as possible. However, his mind was still clear and knew that he had to let some people cover his retreat. Group Cat's Grace. Group Encouragement. Group Malice Transformation. The targets of the first two spells were the few half-purgatory giant. Because of the influence of the spells, the muscles of these guys, which were originally very strong, were now bulging. The Judgment Fiend's third spell was cast on the old ghost nannies that were sold by the caravan. After they were hit by the spell, not to mention their original forms, they were all like plasticine that was needed by naughty children. Many arms, mouths, and eyeballs appeared on their bodies. Go find those fellows, pour out your anger, let them feel your pain. This was the Judgment Fiend's innate spell, bewitching words. The members of the caravan that were affected instantly turned into irrational beasts. After doing this, the Yugro's merchant gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. He decided to give up on the goods on the stall. Anyway, most of them were fake goods and the cost was not high. However, he was unwilling to give up the tent with the luxury house spell, because this magical item was really expensive. Moreover, there were many of the Judgment Fiend's belongings inside. Damn it, I can only use the emergency collection spell. I don't know if it will cause damage to the things inside, however. Before he could chant the spell, the tent suddenly shrunk automatically and transformed into a package. A creature wrapped in gears and clockwork picked up the package and shrugged at the Judgment Fiend. It's better for you to let me use this tent of yours. The Judgment Fiend was furious, but the situation was stronger than him. He decisively chose to retreat, but just as he was about to use the directional teleportation spell. Spell enhancement, dimensional anchor. Command, silence. Snyder's two spells hit the target one after the other. For a moment, because he temporarily lost the ability to cast spells, the Judgment Fiend became extremely frightened. You idiots, come and save me! He ordered the half-purgatory giants through the slave collar. However, something even more frightening happened. Seeing that the opponent wanted to retreat, the ogre Neru, who was fighting with the half-purgatory giants, roared angrily and suddenly burst out with all his strength. The brawny ogre rushed forward and broke the opponent's formation with a bump with his shoulder. The half-purgatory giant who was facing the collision did not even have time to call for help before his chest collapsed and he collapsed to the ground. After that, Lu Xun quickly lowered his center of gravity and threw another enemy to the ground with a shoulder throw. With a crisp sound indicating that the skull was broken, the opponent's helmet rolled to the ground. In a flash, two of his companions were knocked down in succession, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. This shocked the remaining 2.5 purgatory giants, and the flaws in their movements increased by a few points. The ogre, who was in the midst of a fierce battle, would not give his opponent a chance to breathe. He carried the ebony chain and hit them head-on. In the end, the remaining 2.5 purgatory giants followed in the footsteps of their companions and fell to the ground in a mess. The Judgment Fiend, who had a clear understanding of his small body, swallowed his saliva with a gulp sound. Then he felt a chill on his neck. The desert elf Brock had already put his scimitar on his neck. Don't do it, the Judgment Fiend, who had a talent for judging the situation, quickly begged for mercy. Which part of the Bader Expeditionary Army are you? I still have some old acquaintances in the 9 prisons of Bader. Can we talk? Brock snorted coldly. I'm the security officer of the Boomtown's urban management team. However, a smile immediately appeared on his face. You don't say, you really do have an old acquaintance. Chapter 377. As expected of the model merchants of the lower realm, Quess received the account book from the Judgment Fiend. After flipping through it for a while, he lamented, "That's right. The way to accumulate wealth is to kill those who are familiar with it." Indeed, not only was this thinking incompatible with the creatures of the upper realm, even some dimensional merchants who had always maintained a neutral stance did not agree with this business model of draining the pond to catch all the fish. But this was the lower realm after all, a place where evil demons wreaked havoc. The young blue dragon decided to respect the rules here. But in Boomtown, other than his companions, Keys was only familiar with Judgment Demon. In the end, through Judgment Demon's own experience, the young blue dragon obtained quite a lot of wealth from Judgment Demon. hundreds of thousands of soul prisms, 73 unique books, a fully functional adversity boat, more than 300 unequal contracts signed with other creatures, more than 2 million standard units of calamity coins, more than 100 magical items, and all sorts of fake formulas. Judgment Demon, a purebred Yugoloth demon used as a living experiment for the Demolic, had also lost himself. Among the many gains, what Keyes was most delighted about was another incomplete copy of the Nine-Sword catalog. Before the airdrop battle, he had already bought a copy from Judgment Demon. With the addition of this copy, he had basically gathered all of the other Nine-Sword battle techniques, except for some secret techniques that were not passed on to others. As long as he practiced diligently, it was only a matter of time before he became a Grandmaster of Nine Swords. Furthermore, the wealth he had gathered from the Yugoloth merchants had also allowed the newly established Boom Town to complete its primitive accumulation. With money in his pocket, there was no need to panic. The progress of Keyes's plan had also sped up because of this. With the soul prisms paving the way, the construction of the city's infrastructure in the lower realm was practically a success. A weapons workshop, equipped with fire dwarf craftsmen and 80 square meters of Bartholomew to smelt iron. 2,000 Hui Xing soul prisms. A biological modification workshop, equipped with a low-level tower genie and basic inferno creature template. 1,000 Hui Xing soul prisms. A public execution square. Do you really not need a private execution room? Alright, 50 Hui Xing soul prisms. 1 strategic teleportation gate, 1 set of accurate coordinates for most of the lower planes, and 4,000 Hui Xing soul prisms. 64 Hellscream cannons, plus a cannon processing factory and raw materials, plus 3,000 soul prisms. Many craftsmen of Bardo would come here to promote their craftsmanship when they heard that the Lord of Boom Town was a fool with a lot of money, even if they had to pay for the teleportation fees out of their own pockets. Most of the time, as long as the price wasn't too high, the young Blue Dragon would accept everything. In the matter of spending money for Boom Town, Keyes experienced what it meant to one man prospers a nation. He silently thanked the Judgment Demon. Of course, apart from the construction of infrastructure, maintaining the population of Boom Town was also an important part of Keyes's plan. Because he had experience in commanding mercenaries from other planes, the young Blue Dragon knew that the average ability of these fellows who had been tricked by the devils to the front lines of the Blood War wasn't too low. In fact, there were quite a few of them who were famous in their own races, villains. At the very least, they were definitely qualified to be cannon fodder. In Keyes's view, the lives of these people being wasted in the servant army was definitely a great waste of resources. To solve the problem of non-combat casualties, there were 2 main ways to do it. First, reduce the number of people who died to Keyes's Pentashade when they served the Megalosaurus. The most fundamental method was to limit the number of times the Megalosaurus could summon them. Unfortunately, with Keyes's current status, he had no way of restricting the Megalosaurus. Second, provide these fellows with more resources and supplies. At the very least, let them have enough to eat. They wouldn't have to fight each other every day to fill their stomachs, resulting in unnecessary casualties. Comparatively speaking, the latter was more feasible, and Keyes had already come up with a corresponding solution. Gree, who the Ogre Gourmet had previously recruited, had used his demon stomach to identify many abyssal ingredients and developed some dishes that could be eaten by ordinary mortals. However, because Gree lacked the necessary resources, it was difficult to popularize his inventions on a large scale. For Keyes, however, these constraints were no longer a problem, especially now that he had the Judgment Demon's contributions. Within a few days, the young Blue Dragon had built and put to use the first meat acid mist worm of farm in Boom Town. Those who dared to disturb the order of Boom Town, such as the mad rats who had been bribed by the Judgment Demon, were treated by Keyes as free labor under the supervision of the Bone Demon guards. They had been excavating soil from the ground of the stalagmite forest to build the farm. If anyone dared to resist, the public execution square, which cost the young blue dragon 50 soul prisms, would be put to good use. The Batsu devil who had been guarding Boom Town all expressed their willingness to serve as executioners. After all, that was the favorite entertainment of the demons. Perhaps inspired by the expeditionary camp of Bador, or perhaps out of fear of the mysterious dwarf god, Keyes ordered a large-scale construction after building many public infrastructure. He began to build a defensive wall around Boom Town. As for the labor required, it was still borne by the servant army. Because there was enough food, these people's bodies had recovered significantly, and this was a good way to exhaust their excess energy. Through Keyes' efforts, the appearance of Boom Town had undergone tremendous changes in just half a month. Moreover, although some people with weaker physiques died every day due to the environment of the bottomless abyss, Bader's logistics department would fill in new people every few days to ensure the number of servants in the army. Under the premise that there was more food, the survival rate of the newcomers was significantly higher than before. After completing the construction of the city wall, Keyes conducted a population count. The results showed that the total population of Boom Town had doubled compared to when he had first applied for the establishment of Boom Town. Because Boom Town had a formal authorization issued by the Batsu bureaucracy, the rapid development of the city made Keyes, as its lord, feel that there was a great power that had begun to take care of him. At one point in time, Quess had even considered using his wealth to purchase some female creatures from other planes to eliminate the gender imbalance in Boom Town and turn it into a city in the truest sense of the word. Presumably, after doing so, he would receive a greater increase in power. However, this thought only existed in his mind for a moment. This was the front line of the blood war. Although there did not seem to be any danger now, the real test would come at any time. One bird in the hand was better than two in the bush. His plans had to be based on the present. After all, only by living could there be a future. Chapter 378. Daramar flew high in the sky. His emerald green scales gave him an additional layer of camouflage in the green acid fog cloud. Usually, when he did not have any combat missions, he preferred to stay in his temporary nest and take a comfortable nap. But now, he was not in the mood at all. Daramar wanted to find a thicker cloud of acid fog so that he could hide himself better. Because, at this moment, he was full of shame. "I'm so stupid, really," Daramar howled in the depths of his heart. "Why did I dance such a stupid dance in public?" As an adult green dragon, he had always been grateful for his mature and steady personality. Regardless of whether it was during his difficult childhood or his reckless youth, Daramar had always protected himself well. Even in the face of delicious elves, he could rationally stop after tasting them. At most, he would hunt once or twice a year. Because he knew that he was not strong enough, he could not take the initiative to court death. He persisted in following his heart for more than 200 years until he became the true overlord of the forest. He had countless subordinates, and the surrounding forest elf tribes allowed him to take their people as he wished. They did not dare to disobey him in the slightest. Daramar could be said to have used his own experience as a dragon to prove a wise saying, "If you live to the end, you will have everything." Originally, he could have been a tyrant in that forest for a long time until he was tired of life or wanted to go out to find a mate. But the evil Dragon Council's recruitment letter broke Daramar's peaceful life. Out of his worship for the Dragon Queen, from a certain perspective, among Tiamat's many children, the green dragons were the most obedient, and out of his respect for the evil Dragon Council, Daramar responded to the call in time and took the initiative to go to the lower dimensions. To be honest, with his strength as an adult green dragon, it was not very dangerous for him to follow the Megalosaurus army's main force in the Acid Fog Canyon plain, fight battles that were favorable to him, and bully the Thanner Re demons who were retreating in defeat. In addition, Bader's logistics department provided sufficient servants for the Megalosaurus army. Daramar even felt that his quality of life had not decreased, but had improved. Until he met her. Daramar could not forget that fiery red figure for a long time. Many times, he tossed and turned in his sleep, thinking about her. A young female red dragon, a beautiful female red dragon. She had strong muscles, a slender tail, sharp claws, and ruby-like scales that shone brightly. Daramar did not consider himself a superficial dragon. Apart from her beautiful appearance, the young female red dragon's charm was even more important. After all, she was a direct descendant of the third generation of the Pentashade Dragon Queen. Even the commander of the Megalosaurus Legion had to lower his head in respect at the mere mention of her name, Kryphia. If he could gain the favor of this red dragon princess, Dalamar would definitely be able to obtain an enviable love. Every time he thought of this, Dharma felt his dragon blood boil. In order to realize his dream of being a dragon, Dalamar was promoted to the first echelon of the Megalosaurus army through a long period of courageous battle. Now that he had the chance to observe Kryphia up close, Daramar naturally displayed himself even more. Today, after careful preparations, he had finally mustered the courage to wait at the entrance of Kryphia's lair. Enduring the discomfort brought about by the volcanic environment, Daramar finally waited for the Red Dragon Princess, who had just finished her battle and returned to the dragon lair. Following the guidance of the Dragon Knowledge Inheritance, this adult green dragon performed a dazzling dance and initiated a courtship ritual. Sometimes he would flip up and down, making a catch the moon in the 9 heavens, catch turtles in the 5 seas gesture to show his strong body. Sometimes he would twist his head and waggle his tail, making an eagle-eyed expression to show that his mind was sharp, just as he was about to do a handstand to show that he was capable of producing offspring. Kryphia, who had been enduring for a long time, finally exploded. First, she made a face covered in dragon flames, followed by a series of punches and kicks. Every punch landed on flesh, and every claw drew blood. The green dragon's miserable cries even alarmed the higher-ups of the Megalosaurus Legion. However, after they rushed over and learned of the reason, they all revealed an expression that said, "Serves you right." Then, they sat on a nearby mountain and watched the entertainment with great interest. From time to time, they would even give Kryphia some advice. Hit the Achilles tendon of his wings. If his tendon is hit, he won't be able to fly away and escape. Nose, hit the green dragon's nose. Their noses are the most fragile. Kick more accurately. That guy is thin and small. It's indeed not easy to hit him. As for whether Daramar resisted, a third-generation god, adult red dragon, attacking a grass-rooted, adult green dragon at close range. What kind of result would there be? After the one-sided beating, if not for the fact that Kryphia still cared about the fact that they were fellow members of the Megalosaurus Legion, a fresh dragon corpse would have long been produced. Perhaps because she was annoyed by the gossips of the surrounding onlookers, Kryphia abandoned Daramar and turned to look for other unlucky Megalosaurus to stretch her body. Like a green dragon that had been pardoned, she hurriedly fled in a panic. After this battle, although only Daramar himself thought so, although the green dragon had recovered his health on that day by relying on healing spells, his reputation had been thrown into the depths of the bottomless abyss. Even if he was hiding in his nest, he seemed to be able to feel the disdainful gazes of his own kind nearby. Unable to bear it any longer, Daramar felt that he needed to vent. Otherwise, if this continued, he was afraid that he would suffer from internal injuries. Whether it was the 5-colored Megalosaurus or the metal dragons, the best way for them to vent was to fight. Of course, the prerequisite was that they had to be able to defeat them. In other words, they had to find a soft persimmon to pinch. However, in the Acid Fog Canyon plain, there were not many targets that he could choose to vent on. The Megalosaurus that could be recruited were actually not much different in strength from Daramar. Daramar definitely could not afford to provoke the Bot-Or Expeditionary Legion. If he went alone to find the lone demon Thanner Re, with his luck today, he might accidentally encounter the Demon Legion. Then, the only remaining choice was the Servant Legion. They were a group of weak mortals. That's right. What happened to me today was their negligence. Daramar flew high into the sky and breathed in the comfortable acidic gas. He felt that his thoughts had become much clearer. It must be that they were not attentive enough when cleaning the scales, so the emerald green scales on my body were not shiny enough. Or maybe there was some dirt left when cleaning the gaps between my nails, which caused Kryphia. Suddenly thinking of Kryphia and his own tragic experience, Daramar could not help but shudder. Thus, he decided to hurry to the Servant Legion's camp and wreak havoc to his heart's content in order to heal his psychological trauma. Unfortunately, he did not know what the almanac was. He also did not know that today was not a good day for him. P.S. The following content will not be charged. Thank you to Shoutang246 for your constant support, and thank Light Like Rain Winding Mountain for the tip of 1,000 Chidien coins this morning. Everyone is welcome to leave more comments. I will try my best to reply as long as I have time. The new author likes to exchange ideas with everyone. Chapter 379. In the Acid Fog Canyon Plain, it was not wise to choose to travel on the ground. There were too many steep rocks, swamps filled with strong acid, loose ground, and Thanner Re demons that could appear at any time. All these obstacles coveted the lives of passers-by. With wings, one could fly freely in the sky. It would undoubtedly be much safer, and it would be much more convenient to travel. After leaving the Megalosaurus camp, Daramar only needed to dive into the acid cloud high in the sky, and with another dive, he was close to his destination. However, when this green dragon looked down at the camp of the servant army, he immediately fell into deep suspicion. Did he remember the wrong place? In his memory, the servant army camp was located in a forest of stalagmite. Other than the large shacks that the lowly mortals had built for themselves, there should not be a single blade of grass growing there. However, the first thing that Daramar saw was not the protruding stalagmites, but a dense forest. Although most of the trees had withered and were neatly arranged side by side, when the green dragon looked more carefully, he could see that there were still many trees that were not withered in many corners. They were stubbornly growing in the acid fog, like generals monitoring the silent troops. The pale green sunlight could not penetrate this forest. The dense acid fog and the overgrown branches surrounded the trees, blocking the light. The trees themselves looked twisted and deformed. Their claws were like beast claws that had dug into the ground. There was no breeze blowing their withered leaves, but what was chilling was that something seemed to be moving in the forest. You lowly bastards! The mad rat with the head of a deer and the eyes of a mouse did not look like a rat-man beast at this moment. Instead, he looked more like an angry tiger. He led his subordinates and walked on both sides of a team of gray-maned centaurs, constantly urging them to speed up. I'm just dragging a few branches, and you're already dawdling like this. What a bunch of good-looking but useless fools. Compared to half a month ago when he was squatting in the labor camp, the mad rat's crazed appearance was like a completely different person. He had some ability after all, and it was just as the saying went, "If you are gold, you will shine one day." Previously, he was still under the supervision of the Bone Demon Guards and could lose his life at any time. However, with his ability to curry favor and limited management skills, Mad Rat had become a small leader in the labor camp in less than half a month. He was responsible for the management of the newcomers. Because he only knew how to cherish something after losing it, the Mad Rat was now working even harder. To the new laborers, this werbeast was more like a devil than the purebred Batsu. A few days ago, the Mad Rat brought a group of evil rangers and fallen druids to cultivate the economic trees distributed by the mayor outside of town. The Mad Rat was in a hurry, so he kept urging the fallen druids to use spells to promote the growth of the trees. The trees had been contaminated by the power of the abyss. Not only had some of them turned into evil treants, but they had also inexplicably given birth to some abyssal vine monsters. This had led to the situation where the mad rats were unable to deal with it, and more than half of them had died. However, because the economic trees were planted according to the requirements, and the number of trees was even more than what was required, the mad rat was not punished. Instead, he was rewarded. The mission given by the higher-ups today was to let the mad rat lead the gray-maned centaurs to gather enough wood outside of Boom Town and haul it all back to the newly built military factory in town to store raw materials for the production of war machines. In order to continue showing off his ability to the bone demons, the mad rat had already urged the centaurs to haul the wood back and forth more than a dozen times. It was already twice the amount of wood required. However, he felt that it was still not enough. According to the observation of his subordinates, the warehouse was only about a third full. The mad rat believed that he had to make the gray-maned centaurs haul at least 5 or 6 more times to complete the mission. As for whether the gray-maned centaurs would die from exhaustion, what did that have to do with the mad rat's mission? Of course, it was not that the oppressed gray-maned centaurs did not think of resisting. However, their leader, who was the strongest among them, had already challenged the mad rat. In the end, the leader's throat was torn apart by the crazy and cruel werbeast. The situation was stronger than the person, and the weak could only choose to obey. These fellows are probably at their limit today. Although he was still cursing, the mad rat's brain was calmly analyzing and preparing for tomorrow's rainy day. But there is still a lot of wood outside the town. If the mayor gives me a similar mission tomorrow, I have to think of a way to find stronger fellows to work with. The Taurans are stronger and have more stamina. However, I don't think I can defeat their leader. Suddenly, an inexplicable sense of horror welled up in his heart, interrupting the mad rat's thoughts. He wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling, especially when he saw the huge shadow on the ground. After all, the mad rat and the others were originally a servant army. Moreover, they had served the 5-colored megalosaurus before. What followed was a familiar greeting. Insignificant mortals. Landing in the forest, Daramar felt an inexplicable sense of freedom, even though most of the trees had withered. Not long ago, the green dragon had clearly observed the situation in the forest, and even glanced at the newly risen town from afar. Because they were in the forest, the green dragon was able to obtain an extremely high concealment bonus. Daramar silently arrived in front of the wooden transport team, and then suddenly revealed himself. "How dare you? How dare you plunder this forest without permission?" Although he had some questions to ask this group of mortals, he still arrogantly used the Megalosaurus's usual method of questioning. "Don't you know? The forest on this land belongs to me, the great green death, Daramar. Taking without permission is considered stealing. Who ordered you to do such a foolish thing? Hurry up and confess." The drooping dragon's head was close to the mad rat's cheek, and the Megalosaurus's sour breath had begun to make his respiratory tract feel a burning pain. The leader of the laborers, who was still arrogantly scolding his subordinates, immediately put on a flattering face. "Powerful master of the Megalosaurus, we are all poor lumberjacks in Prosperity Town. We have no guts to offend the great Megalosaurus." As he spoke, the mad rat used his tail to whip the wrist of a subordinate who was holding a knife, and asked him to quickly put down the knife. "We are all acting under the orders of the new mayor. Otherwise, even if you lend us 10, no, 100 guts, we would not dare to cut down this forest that belongs to you." "Oh? What kind of devil is that mayor?" Daramar turned his head and looked in the direction of Prosperity Town in the distance, pretending to ask casually. The mad rat was not qualified to know Keys's identity. He could only brace himself and give his own answer. "Sir, our town, no, the mayor of Prosperity Town has the appearance of a human. However, some people speculate that he is a tiefling born of a powerful devil and immortal, because he has a team of Batsu guards. After receiving the answer that the mayor has the appearance of a human, Daramar did not listen to the rest of the mad rat's words. Where was this place? This was the front lines of the blood war. Every Batsu devil here wished they could arm themselves to the teeth. Not a single one of them would choose to take on a human appearance that would affect their strength. Besides, according to the records in the Dragon Knowledge Inheritance, the devils who loved to take on human appearances were all famous Batsu devils. Why would one of them be assigned to manage a slave army's camp? That was why Daramar was certain that this so-called mayor of Prosperity Town was probably the illegitimate child of a tiefling born of a devil and immortal in Batsu's logistics department. As he thought of this, the Green Dragon's heart suddenly began to heat up. P.S. The following content will not be charged. Thanks to Neil BD for the tip of 2,000 coins. Chapter 380. Fanatical emotions kept surging in Daramar's mind, like the bubbles that overflowed after a beer bottle was opened. Not long ago, the humiliation of failing in courtship was unforgettable. After reflecting on the painful experience, he finally understood the gap between himself and Kryphia. Kryphia was a red dragon god's third generation, while he was just an adult green dragon with no background. If he wanted to win the heart of a beauty, he had to find another way. Through the inheritance of dragon-type knowledge in his memories, Dharma discovered that the ancestors of the dragons who had turned the tides and finally won the dragon's heart had mostly used the same effective method. Giving gifts, giving many, many gifts. It was a pity that the plain Daramar was in was not rich, and the forest he ruled was relatively barren. Other than the empty appearance of the gold, or that could only be used to make calamity coins, Daramar usually only used them to decorate his nest. He had nothing else to give. Red dragons mostly liked items that could show their authority. Many adult male red dragons mostly went to mortal countries to kidnap princesses. They were not greedy for the other party's body, but simply felt that they needed a princess to decorate their appearance. At the very least, the red dragons would rule a town and become a megalosaurus lord. That would not be considered a disgrace to their family. Therefore, if one wanted to please a red dragon in terms of the standard of gifts, a town was the lowest. Then, Daramar was at the front line of the blood war. Where could he find a town that he could give to Kryphia? It was as if someone had specially given him a pillow when he was sleepy. Originally, he wanted to go to the servant army's encampment to vent, but who would have thought that it would become a town? The town's name was quite festive. It was called Prosperity. And when he asked around, he found out that the mayor of this town was a guy with no background. Daramar felt that his path had taken a turn, and his luck today had finally begun to prosper. The green dragon, who was in a good mood, glanced at the mad rat in front of him. "Today is your lucky day." He stretched out his claws and grabbed the other party in his palm. Then, he looked at the other mortals present, the mad rat's underlings and the gray-maned centaurs who were in charge of dragging the wood. The green dragon said coldly, "Unfortunately, you don't have a share." With a swoosh, a strong corrosive acid suddenly sprayed out of his mouth. His chin, which had many protrusions, moved slightly to control the flow rate of the acid. All the unlucky bastards identified by the green dragon began to flee in all directions, but it was to no avail. Even the four-legged centaurs were exhausted from the excessive driving of the mad rat. At most, they could only live a little longer than the two-legged centaurs. The mad rat held in the green dragon's palm first opened its eyes wide, then closed them tightly. At this moment, he actually wanted to cover his ears with his hands, but the green dragon's grip made it impossible for him to break free. "Ah, help, boss! I don't want to die!" All sorts of miserable cries could be heard. As long as they came into contact with the green dragon's acid, the flesh and blood of the victim would turn into a pile of charcoal amidst a sizzling sound. Dharma, who had been suppressed for half a day, felt incomparably relaxed at this moment. Properly venting one's emotions is indeed beneficial to one's body and mind. He felt that the lucky bastard in his palm was trembling like a sieve, as if he had been struck by an electric current. Dharma curled his lips in disdain. Insignificant mortals had always been like this. They could not withstand the slightest setback. Unlike the strong green dragon, even if he was beaten up by the red dragon princess, he was only depressed for half a day. Dharma spread his wings and stomped his two powerful hind legs. He jumped straight into the air and slowly glided toward Boomtown. Not long after, he heard the ear-piercing sound of cymbals on the city wall. "Looks like they've already seen us." Dharma lowered his head and smiled at the mad rat. Little did he know how terrifying this expression was in the eyes of the other party. In the forest where he lived, the adult Dharma had raided the surrounding elf tribes several times. When the other party discovered him, they would urgently blow the warning horn. Therefore, he could guess the purpose of the cymbals that were playing on the city wall of Boomtown. To be honest, this scene was quite familiar to him, so he was going to use the old method from before. Tilting his body, Dharma flew clockwise along the city wall, always making sure that his back was facing the city wall with thicker scales and layers of thorns and resin protection. If the other party had long-range attack means, they would most likely shoot at him at this time. But in this way, the long-range attack weapons or annoying spellcasters would expose their positions, making it easier for him to defeat them one by one. To his surprise, although the city's warning system had been triggered, there was no attack. However, after thinking about it, Dharma was relieved. This was a town built by the servants of the Megalosaurus. How would they dare to casually attack a five-colored Megalosaurus? Originally, he was still thinking about whether he should use his breath to wash the ground again in order to force the other party to submit to his power. But who knew that the other party did not dare to attack at all? Tiny and cowardly mortal, Daramar could not help but ridicule in his heart. At the same time, he was a little complacent. But at least he's smart enough to save his little life from being so fragile. However, Dharma did not know that in the Lord's Hall built by hollowing out an entire stalagmite, Keys and his companions were looking at the green dragon that was constantly flying around Boomtown. Is he trying to confuse us before launching a surprise attack? Nera the ogre scratched his head and asked suspiciously, "After all, look at his small physique. He's not even 1/5 the size of Kitha's dragon body, and his muscles are all loose. In short, he looks very weak." His brother, Ogre Gourmet Brew, shrugged and said, "Neru, don't always think about fighting. I think this green dragon might be here to send a message." Including Keys, the others had similar thoughts with Brew. After all, the green dragon was obviously too weak. The young blue dragon thought for a while, and felt that it was better for him to come forward. Perhaps the Megalosaurus Legion had some message to send. So, he walked out of the Lord's Hall. Because he had to face a Megalosaurus, Keys still transformed into his true form out of courtesy and removed his transformation effect. "Excuse me, what are you here for?" A dragon with a mountain-like body, diamond-like scales with lightning arcs flashing across them from time to time, and a head that was larger than Dalamar's when he was young, abruptly appeared in front of him. He suddenly felt that his worldview had been subverted at this moment, and his brain directly went into a state of shutdown. Is my accent not standard? Excuse me, what are you here for?" Keys patiently repeated the question just now, and at the same time, paid attention to his draconic pronunciation. Sensing the high-temperature radiation emitting from the huge mouth that made his hair stand on end just by speaking, Dalamar clenched his claws and destroyed the corpse without caring about the promise that he had made to the mad rat. "Today is your lucky day." Then, he showed an embarrassed expression. I was just passing by, and came to say hello." Chapter 381. Daramar felt that he had been kneeling in this place for decades. Finally, He stood up and put a pair of big green hands on his waist. He frowned because of the soreness in his body. He licked his dry lips, glanced around, and narrowed his eyes to look at the pale green sun above his head. Megalosaurus's unique rhythm regulation organ allowed Daramar to clearly judge the speed of time passing. He had only turned into a green-skinned goblin and stayed here for less than 1/3 of an hourglass. But the soreness in his body and the dizziness in his head were telling him the opposite answer. Daramar couldn't help but cover his forehead and muttered in despair, "Today is definitely not my lucky day. Everything had to start from half a day ago. Maybe. Keys, have a safe trip." Daramar felt as if he had been granted amnesty. He left the place where Boom Town was as if he was running for his life. When facing the young blue dragon, Daramar guessed that the legendary red dragon, the leader of the Megalosaurus Legion, was not half the size of the young man. Therefore, his strategic retreat and going back to think about it at length were not cowardice. Well, definitely not. But just as he adjusted his mentality and tried to accept the fact that there was a huge gap between dragons, something strange suddenly happened. For no reason, Daramar first felt as if he had been hit by something, and then he had to make an emergency landing. Although Megalosaurus did not completely rely on wings to fly, without wings, an ordinary Megalosaurus would definitely not be able to fly normally. The green dragon landed on the ground. Coincidentally, this was the place where he attacked the Mad Rat's logging team. The surrounding puddles and chunks of corpses were either corroded into liquid or burnt by Desui City. It was a fact that he was telling the truth. Who is it who dares to provoke the green death of the Megalosaurus Legion? Daramar roared angrily. Then, he was horrified to find that his dragon's roar had become shrill, and the scenery around him was rapidly becoming bigger. No, he was constantly shrinking. In a short while, Daramar turned from a green dragon into a green-skinned goblin. Just as Daramar panicked and was about to cast a spell on himself to remove the strange transformation effect, a short creature suddenly appeared in front of him. It was a gnome dressed in strange clothes. Perhaps he had some gray dwarf blood in him. His scalp was numb and scabby, and he was not round at all. What are you doing? Do you want to become stronger?" the dwarf asked, but he did not give Daramar a chance to answer. "I know you want to." A faint purple light surged out of the pygmy's hand. In the blink of an eye, this light engulfed the goblin that had turned into a green dragon. By the time Daramar reacted, the dwarf had already disappeared, and the surrounding scenery had become completely new. This doesn't seem to be the acid fog canyon plain. It might not even be the bottomless abyss. There was a rustling sound, and 2 or 3 forest elves who were hunting jumped out of the bushes. When they saw Daramar standing on the forest's animal path, they were stunned at first. There was actually a goblin who did not know how to hide. Then, without thinking, they drew their bows and prepared to kill the pest. "These damn green-skinned elves," Daramar cursed as he dodged the arrows that were shot at him. He suddenly realized something. "Dragon Vein Goblin, just you wait. One day I will make your race extinct." Perhaps because the goblin's language was very accurate, the elves understood his words and felt offended. Originally, it didn't matter whether they killed this goblin or not. After all, they still had to hunt. But now they wanted to kill this goblin. They followed closely behind Daramar. The longbows in their hands were already on their backs, and the sharp ironwood spears in their hands were replaced with sharp ironwood spears. After trying for a long time, Daramar could not release an effective killing spell. He knew that with his small body, he was no match for the elven hunters. He could only rely on the advantage of agility brought by his body size to try to escape from the pursuit of the elves in the bushes. However, the elves were like old turtles who had eaten a weight. They were determined to catch this goblin, peel his skin, and pull out his tendons. Then, they would throw him at the entrance of a goblin cave as a warning to others. After running for a long time, Even if the dragon vein goblin had a good physique, Daramar felt that he could not hold on any longer. After all, with his 2 short legs, he had to compete in jungle parkour with a bunch of long-legged elves. He was at a disadvantage. After running around in circles, Daramar was already panting. The elven hunters behind him were still chasing him. Just as he was about to lose all hope, suddenly, a somewhat familiar thing appeared in front of him. It was an old walloon tree. It seemed that he had once made a home on the crown of this tree. Daramar still remembered that there was a resident of this tree. It seemed to be a horned python that lived near the roots of the tree. However, that fellow had fled in a hurry the day before he moved in. It seemed to be living in a tree hole. As he ran, Daramar casually picked up a rock from the ground. Then, he suddenly sped up and ran toward the bottom of the walloon tree. He saw the tree hole that was originally only large enough for a claw to reach in. Now it was even larger than his body. Without thinking, he swung his arm and threw the rock into the pitch-black tree hole with his greatest strength as a dragon vein goblin. A dull thud rang out, as if a wooden stick had struck leather. Daramar immediately knew that he had succeeded. He quickly burrowed into a bush beside him. Then, using the bush as cover, he carefully made his way to the back of the walloon tree. Then, he heard 2 panicked voices in the elven language. It was obvious that the horned python had misunderstood the elven hunters. As a magical beast, the horned python was the overlord of this area. Even if it could not afford to offend the elven tribes, it would not have a problem dealing with a lone elf. And because the elven hunters were familiar with the habits of the various creatures in the forest, they knew that the horned python would eventually catch up to them no matter how they tried to escape. Instead of waiting for death, they might as well give it their all. Unfortunately, the difference in level between creatures was not something that could be easily overcome with courage and courage. They were either strangled to death, poisoned, or pierced by the sharp horns on the horned python's head. A few of the elven hunters died one after another. However, the elven hunter did manage to achieve something after a desperate struggle before his death. The ironwood spear was indeed sharp. Many of the scales on the horned python's body had been punctured, and half of the broken spear was still embedded in its muscles. Blood was gushing out with a sizzling sound. The pain made the horned python burn with rage. It only felt that it wanted to kill a few more lives to vent its anger. Its sensitive sense of smell allowed it to smell the scent of goblins. The horned python followed the scent and started to crawl toward the back of the walloon tree. It made a rustling sound. Chapter 382. I shouldn't stop, Daramar thought to himself in despair. Running for a long distance would cause the muscles to produce a large amount of lactic acid. If he suddenly stopped, these substances would cause his entire body to ache, as if he could no longer move his feet. When facing an enraged, ferocious beast, such a situation was undoubtedly the worst, and it was 100% fatal. Leaning against the wallen wood, Daramar attempted to support his body. He felt that he had to do something. However, the bloodthirsty and ferocious horned python did not want to give him the chance. It opened its mouth and bit toward him. No! Between life and death, Daramar's frail goblin body suddenly straightened. Tiny scales instantly covered the surface of his skin. 2 slender arms supported the horned python's mouth, which it was trying to close with an unbelievable strength. Looking at the sharp teeth that were about to pierce his cheeks, Daramar felt a surge of anger for no reason. Lowly reptile! Scorching liquid surged up from the goblin's abdomen, finally turning into a stream of water that sprayed toward the horned python's throat. The horned python twitched incessantly and rolled back and forth on the ground. It even hit its head on the ground in an attempt to knock itself unconscious. White smoke rose from its 7 orifices as the horned python spasmed incessantly and rolled back and forth on the ground. It even hit its head on the ground, trying to knock itself unconscious. However, after a short while, the horned python stopped struggling. Its round body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye, and a liquid of an indescribable color poured out from every hole on its body. Is this the power of a dragon vein goblin? Daramar stretched out his hands and repeatedly looked at the tiny scales on his skin. It's really quite weak, but having power is better than having nothing, he thought firmly. Walking to the side of the horned pythons that had gathered into a pool of indistinguishable shapes, Daramar first tested it and realized that the residual acid could not harm him. Then, he reached out and picked up the few snake teeth and skin that had withstood the test of corrosion. After doing this, Daramar turned and walked to the opposite side of the wallen wood. There were a few snacks there that could fill his stomach. Although the goblin had a mouth full of sharp teeth, they weren't sharp enough, so he ate his meal slowly. After eating his fill, Daramar crawled into the tree hole where the horned python lived. Other than the remains of some useless creatures, he also found some leather armor and rusted weapons. That snake might have attacked the caravans that traversed the forest in the past and even dragged the guards of the caravans back into the cave to eat. After a simple analysis, he came to a more likely conclusion. At the same time he thought, that's right. Robbing caravans is a good way to expand. But now that I'm alone, it's obviously not enough. I need to find some spawns to be cannon fodder. Yes, there's a goblin cave nearby. After deciding on the plan, Daramar quickly carried it out. He first tidied up the leather armor he found and wrapped it around himself as a protective gear. Then, he tried the weapons, but unfortunately they were too weak due to the rust. Thus, he could only tie the horned python's teeth to the elven hunter's ironwood spear to make a more powerful weapon. Finally, he thought of a way to use snake skin, tree branches, and resin to make a simple leather shield. When doing these things, Daramar was decisive and resolute. His ability to carry out his orders was far from what a green dragon could compare to. However, he did not realize this at all. It was as if thinking about problems in the way of a dragon vein goblin had become his instinct. After equipping himself fully, he did not hesitate, nor did he have any intention of resting. He took large strides and walked toward the goblin cave closest to the wallen wood in his memory. Hurry up and get to work. The earth goblin sergeant waved his vines and walked back and forth between the shorter goblin cousins, supervising their work. Working for the great giant snake dissolver, lord of the forest goblins, dragon vein warlock, green warlock Lord Daramar is the luckiest thing in your lives. If I find out that anyone dares to slack off, the idiot I nailed to a tree to dry 2 days ago is the best example. The goblin laborers shouted loudly in agreement, expressing their fervent desire to serve Lord Daramar. Using the scythes and hoes they had stolen from the nearby human villages, or other tools that they could use, the goblins widened and flattened the path through the forest bit by bit. At this moment, Daramar was lying in his palace, listening to the information and suggestions provided by his various aides. This palace was actually a little too large by goblin standard. It had been directly expanded from the ancestral cave of a certain goblin tribe. A stone stove sat in the corner, large enough to cook several large pots at the same time. In fact, the goblin chefs were doing this now. On the other side of the palace, there was a fire pit large enough to roast beef ribs or an entire lamb. A spectacular chopping board stood in the middle of the room, and Daramar's aides sat around this chopping board. Lord Green Warlock. Resisting the desire to glance at the fragrant meat soup that was about to be served, one of the goblin aides stood up, bowed, and said to Daramar, "Why did you order the little ones to build that path in the cold winter?" He deliberated over his tone and continued to ask, "What I mean is that the various goblin tribes do not need to use that path, and there are no human caravans passing by at this time of the year. Are you questioning my decision?" Daramar, who was enjoying the massage, suddenly sat up, propping himself up with his hands on the chopping board. Seeing that the other party hurriedly bowed, he snorted in annoyance. I don't think you dare. But this kind of question will only be asked once. You just have to remember that my words must be carried out completely. As a king, Daramar felt that there was no need to explain his thoughts to others. To those people, they just had to do as he said. After all, the so-called staff meeting mechanism was nothing more than a tool he used to stabilize the newly established Forest Goblin Alliance and temporarily arrange for the goblin leaders of the various tribes. What could those fellows understand? Moreover, this aide was about to retire today. Then, I will announce the next order. The Goblin Alliance will remember everyone. The Earth Goblin Guards, wearing armor and wielding sabers and axes, suddenly surged into the palace. Without a word, they directly pounced on the aides. They nimbly swung their sabers, as if they were chopping melons and vegetables. The original Goblin tribe leaders were all beheaded. Looking at the marks that appeared on the chopping board, Daramar frowned, but he did not say anything. It was time for him to eat. He picked up a wooden spoon and scooped up a spoonful of cream goblin soup, tasting it slightly. Daramar nodded. The taste was not bad, especially since he was the only goblin who could enjoy it. Chapter 383. The harsh winter passed quickly, and the warm but cold early spring had arrived. A new year had arrived, and the hard-working people had already started their work for the shiny coins. After a winter of aging, this batch of new wine should be enough to wake up the noses of those drunkards. The boss of the caravan calculated. There was another sentence that he did not want to think about. The prerequisite is that the caravan has to pass through this vast forest safely. The winter snow was melting and the main road was muddy. Because of the wine, the caravan's carriages were generally quite heavy, and almost could not pass through the mud. Other than the main road, there was a small path that led to the caravan's destination, but it required them to pass through the forest. Although there could be snow on the small path, it was a shorter journey, and the smaller path would undoubtedly be much faster. After much consideration, the boss of the caravan decided to take the small path, but he had to take some risk. In this forest, not only were there elves who were not friendly to humans, but there were also gnome tribes who were used to robbing caravan. Therefore, for the safety of the caravan, he had no choice but to spend money to hire guards to ensure the safety of the caravan. Even so, the wine merchant was still somewhat uneasy, and constantly observed his surroundings. However, as the caravan moved forward, something unexpected happened. He found that the originally narrow path in the forest had been artificially strengthened and widened, and even the snow on the road seemed to have been cleaned by professionals. He was originally worried that there would be an ice shell due to the snow, so he specially prepared some chains that could be installed on the wheels to increase friction and grip. Most likely the lords nearby built the road before winter, the merchant thought to himself. It's a pity that the carriages with chains are gone, or else I could bring a few more barrels of new wine. In the end, because of the good road, the wine merchant arrived at his destination 4 or 5 days earlier than expected. It didn't take long for the news of an excellent transportation route to appear in the forest to spread among the traveling merchants. Many human caravans tried to pass through this path, and in the end, they all passed through the forest without a hitch. As more and more caravans chose to pass through the forest for the sake of convenience, friction inevitably arose between them and the forest elves, the owners of the forest. The forest elves believed that the humans had disturbed their peaceful lives and invaded their territory. The humans believed that the forest elves' deliberate obstruction had affected their accumulation of wealth. In addition, the instigator of these conflicts, the only ruler of the Goblin Tribe Alliance, Dalamar, was fanning the flames. He began to lead the Goblin Tribe to attack the traveling merchants that were alone, and every time, he would not leave anyone alive. What was even more sinister was that this sinister dragon vein gnome would even intentionally fake wounds when it was done with the massacre and cleaning up the battlefield. At the same time, it would leave behind some ironwood spears commonly used by the forest elves, or elven arrows with beautiful tail feathers. Once, twice, thrice, and even more. No matter how much they tried to restrain themselves, this kind of bloody incident would slowly make them lose their rationality. Humans and forest elves, two races that had been living in harmony, began to engage in a tense armed confrontation. From small bloodshed to vengeance, and then to the intervention of the armies of the two races. War was imminent and unstoppable. The war escalated once again after the flames were ignited. Today, the elves had turned a human city into ruins. Tomorrow, the humans would send out an elite team to massacre an elf tribe. The two races began an all-out war, and Dalamar once again began to play with his own schemes. Gathering the strength of the various goblin tribes, he used this as his capital to strike a balance between the forest elves and the humans. Using his advantage as an evil neighbor of the forest elves, Dalamar first ordered people to find out where the various tribes of the forest elves were stationed. He also drew a detailed but slightly edited map. He treated this map as a commodity and sold it to the various military lords on the human side, exchanging it for weapons and armor. When the human army gathered their strength to encircle and annihilate some of the weaker forest elves' tribes, Dalamar also sent people to inform the forest elves, reminding them to make early preparations. He even provided a portion of the goblin caves for them to use to retreat. In exchange, he asked the forest elves for some elven longbows, as well as a large number of elven arrows. He even said, "Join hands to fight against the enemies of the forest." With weapons, armor, longbows, and arrows, Dalamar specially selected a group of earth goblins to form an elite team. He named this team the Green War Mercenary Group, and began to change from selling information to selling military force. Whether it was the forest elves or the humans, none of them had expected that an unremarkable race would take advantage of the war between the two races to rise up. Although they really wanted to destroy this goblin army, they were unable to do so due to the anxiety of the war. In the end, they could only pinch their noses and silently accept this fait accompli, choosing to hire the Green War Mercenary Group to serve them. To Dalamar, he did not care whether his employer was a human or a forest elf. The only choice was that the highest bidder would get the job. The Green War Mercenary Group would serve whoever could afford it. This all-out war between the humans and the forest elves lasted for 3 years and 3 months. The infamous Green War Mercenary Group welcomed their last hire. Dalamar had met many of the human military lords more than once, but this last meeting was the only time he had met so many old clients at the same time. Green War Mercenary catch. The leader of the human military lords disdainfully threw a bag full of gold coins to Dalamar after handing over the mission. "Remember, this is our last payment. I don't want anything to go wrong, or else I will be your enemy," Dalamar replied with a smile, his tone without the slightest hint of mockery. The mission this time could be said to be difficult. At the very least, it was impossible for the humans to pass through the forest and reach the rear of the forest elves. However, it could also be said to be simple. They did not even need to fight. They only needed to pass through the forest quietly. The human alchemists of the Alchemist Guild had concocted a poison that could weaken or even kill the forest elves after a long period of preparation. The military lords had hired Dalamar and put him in charge of pouring the poison into the forest elf tribe's public water source. Once the poison took effect, the humans would assemble an army and charge into the forest to completely encircle and annihilate the forest elf tribe. If this plan succeeded, the war between the two races would end at the same time, and the humans would obtain the final victory. Unfortunately, Dalamar had led the Green War mercenaries to complete the first half of the mission. However, this black-hearted dragon bloodline goblin had only poured a small portion of the poison into the second half of the poison. The forest elves had indeed been weakened. At the very least, the human army discovered that the forest elves, who originally had the home advantage, were not as strong as before after charging into the forest. However, the forest elves were not without the ability to retaliate. The forest elves and the human army were evenly matched. Just as the suspicious human military lords were about to give the order to retreat and send people to capture Dalamar for questioning, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. A terrible fire suddenly spread from the periphery of the forest to the inside. In the dry winter, after the fire spread, there was no way to stop it. When the fire was extinguished, hordes of goblins surged into the almost completely burned forest. They searched every inch of the forest and slaughtered all the surviving forest elves and humans. After this battle, not only were the forest elves exterminated, but the human forces were also greatly weakened. No force, could stop Dalamar and prevent the establishment of a new goblin kingdom. When this dragon bloodline goblin reached the age of 80 and was about to die, he only said one sentence. "It's a pity that I haven't drunk cream elven soup in about 30 years. Then, the world spun, and the dragon bloodline goblin king who ruled the world once again returned to the acid fog canyon. He shook his head and lightly patted his face. He then discovered that the power that had been stagnant in his body had now been unsealed. Dalamar opened his arms and did not hesitate. He quickly turned into an adult green dragon and fled toward the Megalosaurus camp. After he left, a burst of laughter rang out in the quiet, withered forest. The chess pieces have been prepared. Players who have been waiting for a long time, it will be your turn soon. Chapter 384. Acid Fog Canyon, Broken Cliff. In the palace of the Demon Lord, a banquet was going on. Although the battle at the front was tense, it didn't seem to have anything to do with the participants of the banquet. It didn't affect them from eating at the back. Even if these guys didn't need to eat at all, they all liked the feeling of chewing food and swallowing wine. Smear the honey of the demon bee and fry it in a pan of oil. With a sizzle, the soft taste of the acid fogworm will be gone. The speaker had a huge bull's head on his head. The lower half of his body was made up of 2 legs, but they had hooves with split toes. Black mane grew wildly all over his body. From his back to the top of his head, there was always a dim flame burning. If a scholar who dabbled in the demon studies was here, he would probably recognize who this Tauren was at a glance and silently leave. Everyone knew that this king of the beasts' favorite thing to do the most was to throw strangers into his endless labyrinth and play with them wantonly. That was his nest, located on the 600th floor of the abyss, the king of the beasts and king of the Tauren Buffett's kingdom. Compared with other ancient demon lords, Buffett's character was undoubtedly much more irritable. He was either participating in a war or plotting to start the next one. Such a character would naturally make many enemies, such as King of the Knolls, Yeenagu, Six Fingers, Graz, ZT. However, although he had been haunted by wars and conspiracies for many centuries, Buffett still hadn't fallen even once. Not only that, but what made many demon lords surprised was that the bull in their eyes was actually a powerful creator. Usually, only the most powerful among the demon lords, the demon princes, deserved to have such great power. What was a demon creator? The criterion was very simple, but the operation was extremely difficult: to create a new kind of Tana re-demon race. For the demon lords, creating a life was not too much of a problem. But it was very difficult to throw them into the abyss and let them reproduce and grow into a race on their own. Because those newborn Tana were likely to be preyed on by other demons the moment they were thrown into the abyss. Many knowledgeable demon lords were unable to complete the creation experiments, but Buffett had succeeded in doing so. Moreover, it wasn't just once. Not only had he used himself as a model to create a gigantic ox fiend that could wrestle with a flame fiend Baylor, he had also created a large number of ancestral fiends known as Abyss Heavy Infantry. There were even rumors that the Bugala ape demon lord of the 80th layer of the Abyss was also one of Buffett's creations. Although many demonology experts believed that the reason why the Lord of Beasts could touch the authority of the demon creator was that he was suspected to be an ally of Lady Kangi. But from a certain perspective, this also proved the strength of this Tauren king. At the very least, the demon lord of the Acid Fog Canyon Plain, the tyrant worm who had just ascended to godhood, could not afford to offend Buffett, even if it was only an incarnation of the other party. Otherwise, there was no way he would greet someone who was feasting on acid mist worms in front of him with a smile. Furthermore, they were all first-generation descendant. "Little Bug, is your army ready?" Buffett asked in a seemingly casual manner as he chewed on the fried acid mist worms and allowed the juices to spill all over his chest. Faced with this question, the tyrant worm, who was eating with him in the incarnation of Hemtar, carefully deliberated for a moment before replying. "More than half of the army has been deployed. I've also prepared a big gift for the 5-colored Megalosaurus." In fact, his deployment had been completed 10 days ago. But facing a warlike demon lord, the tyrant worm felt that he still had to hide a little. If they were to become enemies in the future, it would be easier to confuse the other party when they met on the battlefield. That's enough. Although this is a battle in your territory, you don't have to be the main force. After burping, Buffett pushed all the cutlery in front of him to the side and said arrogantly to the tyrant worm, "Looks like the bull can't wait any longer." Hearing someone call him a bull, Buffett snorted. 2 streams of water spurted out from his nostrils and splashed onto the floor of the tyrant worm's palace. The evil negative energy contained in it exploded and corroded the floor into 2 deep pits. "Mangy little dwarf, I think you're itching for a beating." After threatening, Buffett shut his mouth and didn't say anything else. He didn't want to provoke the other party too much. After all, he was still a god. Maybe he wasn't weaker than Buffett, and he was definitely much stronger than the tyrant worm. Hearing the king of beasts speak ill of him, Stim wasn't angry. He even made a zipping motion with his mouth, indicating that he wouldn't mock Buffett anymore. Wait a moment. Holding a small hammer made of adamantine, Stim knocked hard, making pa-pa sounds. He seemed to be focused on dealing with the charcoal-roasted enchantment Caliceri in front of him. Suddenly, a purple light flashed in his eyes. "It's finally done. The last chess piece is finally completed. Like I said, a war chess game without a Megalosaurus character is soulless." Hearing this, the tyrant worm hurriedly asked, "Your Excellency." He didn't dare to call the other party a little dwarf like Buffett. Instead, he used the honorific of a god. In 2 natural days, your plane will be temporarily included in my chessboard. If you achieve the final victory, at the same time, the rules of the Blood War will also determine you as the final winner of this battle. Unless Tiamat comes herself, no matter how much she wants to start a war, according to the rules of the Blood War, the Bator camp will have to wait for 1,000 years before they can attack the same plane. When he said this, Stim changed from his previous cheeky appearance. He was like the most impartial god. With the clergy of war chess, role-playing, and virtual games, he had to be like this when he announced the rules of the game. Remember, within these 2 natural days, you must strip the Megalosaurus clergy and give it to me as an admission fee. Stim's eyes shone with a purple light as he stared at the tyrant worm who had transformed into Helmuter. This is the previous Styx contract. It cannot be violated. The Megalosaurus was one of the most important elements in virtual games. Whether it was as a wild monster, a level boss, a protagonist template, or even a game skin, the Megalosaurus element had great value. This was also the reason why Stim participated in this blood war. Because it had swallowed a lot of Megalosaurus before it was apotheosized, the tyrant worm had a small part of the Megalosaurus clergy after it was apotheosized. Through constant calculations, Stim found that it was almost his only chance to obtain this authority from the tyrant worm. Therefore, He came to the plain of the Acid Fog Canyon and made a deal with the tyrant worm. He also found the monarch of beasts as an ally. Little dwarf, don't forget your promise. I want the labyrinth clergy. This is also an important part of the contract. Buffett reminded him. Of course, I will tell you after the game is over, Stim replied immediately. After all, the labyrinth element is no longer popular for many games. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.